Hey guys, just want to say thanks for tuning in today. Smash that subscribe button if you're new here, and as always, please like this video if you enjoy the stories. Now, let's get into the stories.
I should have known something was off when she handed me the envelope before we even got inside. We were standing under the flickering streetlight outside this old train station that got turned into a diner. The place was half renovated, half abandoned, like someone ran out of money halfway through. The sign buzzed overhead, and the windows were fogged up even though it wasn't that cold. She walked up smiling like this was completely normal, like first dates always start with mysterious mail. She held out a sealed envelope with my full name written across the front in neat handwriting. Not just my first name, first and last, spelled right. She said it was for me, and that I should open it if I tried to leave early. That was it. No laugh after, no wink, just that same smile. I laughed though, because what else do you do? I thought it was some kind of joke. Maybe she was one of those girls who does quirky stuff for fun. I shoved the envelope into my jacket pocket without thinking too much about it. I should have thought more. We met online a week before. Her profile wasn't weird or anything. Normal pictures, normal bio. Like movies, iced coffee, late night drives. We've been texting nonstop and she seemed cool. She knew a lot about random stuff, like train history and old diners, which I thought was kind of interesting. So when she suggested meeting at this place, I said sure. Inside, the diner looked stuck in the 80s. Cracked vinyl boots, dusty jukebox in the corner that didn't work, and this weird smell like burned sugar and cleaning chemicals. There were only two other people there. An old guy sitting alone at the counter and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. We slid into a booth near the back. She picked the seat facing the door. I didn't notice that at first. At first, it was normal. We talked about school, about our families. She asked me questions, a lot of them. Where I grew up. How long I've been in this area. If I lived with anyone. I figured she was just making conversation, but she never really talked about herself unless I asked directly. Even then, her answers were short. Then she started mentioning things that made my stomach drop a little. She asked if I still ran at night near the river. I do that sometimes, but I never posted about it. She said she liked the coffee shop near my apartment building, the one on the corner. She described the mural on the side perfectly. I don't remember telling her where I live exactly. Maybe I did while we were texting. Maybe I forgot. I told myself I was overthinking it. The food came. Burgers and fries. She barely touched hers. She just kept watching me eat like she was waiting for something. Every time the door opened and someone walked in, her eyes snapped up fast. I reached into my pocket at one point just to feel the envelope. It was thick, like there were multiple sheets inside. I asked her what was in it. She just smiled again and reminded me it was only if I tried to leave early. That's when it started feeling less like a joke. About 30 minutes in, my phone buzzed. I looked down expecting a random notification, but it was a text from an unknown number. Just one sentence. Do not leave yet. I stared at it. I hadn't told anyone where I was. My friends didn't even know I was on a date tonight. I glanced up at her. She was already looking at me. I asked if she sent. She tilted her head slightly like she was confused. I told myself it could be a coincidence. Spam message. Wrong number. But then my phone buzzed again. You were doing fine. My hands felt cold. I tried calling the number. It went straight to voicemail. Generic automated voice. I decided I needed air. I told her I was going to the restroom. She nodded, still calm. The hallway to the restroom was narrow and dim. The light above flickered like the one outside. I checked the number again. No caller did, just blank. I thought about opening the envelope right then, but something stopped me. She said if I tried to leave early. Going to the bathroom wasn't leaving. Inside the restroom, there was graffiti on the walls. Most of it was old, scratched into the paint. But one message looked fresh, written in black marker. Open it. My chest tightened. Maybe it had been there already. Maybe it was coincidence again, but the timing felt wrong. I went back to the booth. She hadn't moved. Her food still untouched. I sat down and tried to act normal. My heart was beating so loud I was sure she could hear it. She leaned forward and asked if I was okay. I nodded. Then the old guy at the counter turned around slowly and looked straight at me. Not at her. At me. He held my gaze for a few seconds too long, then turned back around. Another text came in. 2 more minutes. I couldn't do it anymore. I stood up and told her I had to go. I made some excuse about not feeling well. I reached for my wallet. That's when she finally stopped smiling. She reminded me about the envelope. My hands were shaking as I pulled it out. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I tore it open right there at the table. Inside were printed photos. Pictures of me. Walking out of my apartment building yesterday morning. Me at the gym 2 days ago. Me running near the river at night. Some of them were taken from far away, but some were close enough that I could see my own confused face. Under the stack of photos was a note. It said that if I left before the date was over, the pictures would be sent to my family, my job, and posted online with a story attached. A story about how I stalked her, how I wouldn't leave her alone. There were screenshots printed too. Edited screenshots of messages that made it look like I was harassing her. I felt like I was going to throw up. I looked up at her and she was watching me calmly. Not smiling anymore, just waiting. I sat back down. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, set it on the table face up. The screen showed a draft email with my mom's address in the recipient line. I never gave her that. The old guy at the counter stood up and walked toward the door. As he passed our booth, he dropped something on the table without looking at me. It was another photo, taken through my apartment window, me sitting at my desk last night. I couldn't breathe right. She told me casually that the date would end when she said it ended, that if I cooperated, nothing bad would happen. We would just have a nice dinner. I nodded because what else was I supposed to do? For the next hour, she talked about random things, about trains and diners and how people underestimate how easy it is to build a story around someone's life. She said most people never notice how much of themselves is visible if you pay attention. I barely heard half of it. I was too busy trying to figure out if this was some elaborate prank or something worse. Another text came in. Good choice. I looked around the diner. The waitress never once came back to our table. It was like we were invisible. The old guy was gone. At some point, she asked me to hand over my phone. She said it was just until the end of the date. I hesitated, but she tapped her phone screen lightly, reminding me of the email draft. I gave it to her. She placed it in her purse without even checking it. The clock above the counter ticked loudly. Every second felt stretched out. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 90 minutes total, she stood up and said the date was over. Just like that. She handed me back my phone. No new messages. No email sent. She leaned in close and told me she hoped I learned something about commitment. Then she walked out. I sat there for a full minute before moving. The diner suddenly felt louder, like normal noise had returned. The waitress walked over and asked if everything was okay, like nothing weird had happened. I left money on the table and walked outside. The street was empty. No sign of her. I checked the envelope again. The photos were still there. The note, too. When I got home, I checked my apartment window from outside. There was no obvious camera. No sign of anything. I'd locked her on everything that night. Deleted our messages. Changed my passwords. I even told my family some vague story about someone messing with me just in case. 3 days later, I had a plain white envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was one photo. Me sitting in that diner booth, holding the envelope, looking terrified. Taken from behind her shoulder. The moment he said it, my brain just stopped working for a second. I was still buckling my seatbelt when he glanced at me and casually asked why I'd moved my couch since the last time he'd seen it. He said it like he was asking about the weather, like he'd been in my apartment before, like it was normal. And I had never met him in person until that exact moment. I wish I could say I laughed it off right away. I didn't. I froze. My hand was still on the seatbelt and my heart did this weird drop in my chest. I remember noticing how clean his car was. Black interior, faint smell of air freshener, and something minty. The kind of car that feels too quiet when the doors close. We'd been talking for about 2 weeks. We met on an app. His profile seemed normal. Gym pictures, dog photos, basic stuff. We texted every night. He was funny in a dry way. He always said good morning. Nothing screamed danger. He insisted on picking me up. I told him I could drive myself, but he said he liked being a gentleman. He said he felt better knowing I got home safe. It sounded sweet at the time. I gave him my address. I live in a small apartment complex near a grocery store, nothing fancy. Second floor, corner unit. When he pulled up, he waved like he was excited. I remember thinking he looked exactly like his pictures. No red flags. Until that couch comment. I asked him what he meant. I tried to sound calm, like maybe I misheard. He just shrugged and said he must have been mistaken. Said maybe I had mentioned rearranging my place when we were texting. But I hadn't. I rearranged my living room 3 days before the date. Randomly. I got bored and dragged my couch to the opposite wall so I could see the tea from the kitchen. I didn't post about it. Didn't tell anyone. My mom didn't even know. And he said it like he'd physically seen it before and after. I told myself Inga did mention it. Maybe I forgot. I have a bad memory sometimes. That's what I kept repeating in my head while he pulled out of the parking lot. We were going to this late-night dessert place about 20 minutes away. Open until 1 in the morning. Neon lights, milkshakes, waffles. Public place. I focused on that. Public place. He kept glancing at me while he drove. Not in a sweet way. What, checking something? Measuring my reaction. He asked what I did today. I told him I worked from home and cleaned a little. He nodded like he already knew. Then he asked if my upstairs neighbor still blasted music at night. My stomach tightened again. I never told him about my neighbor. I complained about it to my friend once over text, but not to him, unless I somehow forgot that too. I tried to scroll back in my head through our conversations, like mentally I reading old messages. Nothing. I asked him how he knew that. He said I must have mentioned it while we were texting late one night. I didn't respond. The drive felt longer than 20 minutes. He took a different route than I usually take to get to that area. Lots of back roads, darker streets, fewer cars. I asked if he missed a turn. He said he just preferred this way. Less traffic. I watched the street signs closely. I started memorizing them. He kept talking about random things. His job, his dog, how he almost moved to my neighborhood last year. That last part made my chest tighten again. He said he looked at apartments in my exact complex. Said he almost signed a lease in the building next to mine. I asked which building. He described it perfectly. Even mentioned the broken light near the mailboxes. That light has been broken for months. It flickers on and off at night. You wouldn't know about it unless you've been there after dark. I felt this heavy pressure building in my head, like everything was stacking up too fast. We finally got to the dessert place. Bright lights, loud music, lots of people. I felt a tiny bit better the second we walked inside. Crowded is good. We ordered milkshakes. He paid. $18 total. He didn't hesitate. We sat at a small metal table near the window. For a while, it was almost normal again. He asked about my family. I asked about his dog. He smiled a lot. He had nice teeth. He looked like a completely regular guy. But every so often he'd drop another comment. He mentioned the painting above my couch. Said he liked that kind of abstract art. I never posted that painting anywhere. It's just this random thing I bought for $25 at a thrift store. I asked him straight up if he'd ever been near my apartment before. He laughed softly and said of course not. Said that would be weird. He said maybe I underestimate how much I share online. So while he was in the bathroom, I checked my profiles. Instagram, Facebook, everything. Nothing showed my living room. Nothing showed my couch. No painting. My hands were shaking slightly when he came back. I tried to keep things light. Asked him about his college days. He told a story about getting locked out of his dorm once and having to climb in through a window. I don't know why, but that story made everything feel worse. About halfway through the date, my phone buzzed. I looked down. It was a notification from my home security app. I froze. I only use that app to check the front door camera sometimes. I installed it after someone tried to open my door last year by mistake. The notification said motion detected in living room. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the words. He noticed. He asked what was wrong. I said nothing, just a spam notification. I didn't want to show him. I'd excused myself and went to the bathroom. Locked myself in a stall. Opened the app. There was a video clip. The camera angle was from my bookshelf, pointed toward the couch. My couch. In its old position. I stopped breathing. The timestamp was from 2 days ago, at 2:13 in the morning. The video showed someone standing in my living room. The camera only caught part of him. Jeans, dark hoodie. He was facing the couch like he was studying it. Then he walked toward the camera and the video cut off. I replayed it 3 times. The hoodie looked exactly like the one he was wearing that night. I felt like the floor was tilting. I checked the date on a flip again. 2 days ago. That was the night I rearranged my living room. I moved the couch the next morning because something fell off when I woke up. Like something in the room had shifted. I told myself I was imagining it. I stayed in the bathroom for at least 5 minutes trying to think. If I confronted him, what would happen? If I ran, would he follow me? We came in his car. I didn't want to get back in that car. I texted my friend my location and just wrote help. Didn't explain. Just sent it. When I came back to the table, he was staring at my phone sitting there. He asked if everything was okay at home. My chest tightened again. I asked him what he meant. He said I looked worried. I asked him if he had ever been inside my apartment. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, really looked at me, like he was deciding something. Then he leaned back and said sometimes people leave windows unlocked without realizing. My ears started ringing. He said my balcony door had been easy to slide open, that he just wanted to see if the place matched the photos he imagined in his head from our conversations. I couldn't speak. He said he didn't take anything, didn't break anything. He just looked around. He described my bedroom, the layout, the laundry basket in the corner. I felt sick. He said he liked the new couch position better, said it made the space feel more open. That was it for me. I stood up. I didn't care that people were staring. I grabbed my bag and walked straight to the counter. I asked the employee to call the police. My voice was shaking so bad I could barely get the words out. He didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, calm, watching. The police came fast. I showed them the video, told them everything. They went to talk to him. I never saw him again after that night. I found out later he'd been reported before for trespassing, but nothing ever stuck. I moved out of that apartment 2 weeks later. I didn't feel safe there anymore. Sometimes I still think about how normal he seemed at first, how easily I got into that car, and how he noticed my couch before I even said a word. I knew something was wrong the second she said it, but my brain didn't catch up until way later. Halfway through dinner, out of nowhere, she asked the waiter to take a photo of us. That part wasn't weird by itself. People do that all the time. Couples, friends, first dates trying to look cute for social media. I didn't think twice. I scooted closer to her in the booth. But while the waiter was lining up the shot, she leaned in toward me, smiling for the camera, and whispered that this was for proof. She said it soft, calm, like it made total sense. I remember smiling in the picture because I didn't process it fast enough. I just thought maybe she meant proof that we finally met in person. Proof for her friends, something harmless. But her tone wasn't joking. We met on a language exchange app. She said she had just moved to the city and didn't know anyone yet. Her profile looked normal. Coffee pics, bookstore selfies, random sunset shots. We'd been messaging for about a week. She seemed a little intense, but not in a scary way. More like she just had a lot of energy. She picked the restaurant. This small rooftop place downtown with string lights hanging over wooden tables. It was kind of trendy, but not too expensive. My meal was $22 and hers was $19. Nothing crazy. The city skyline was behind us, and it actually felt like a good first date setting. At first, everything was fine. She talked a lot. About her old job, her ex, her old apartment. She kept mentioning how people lie all the time. How she hated liars. How important honesty was to her. I nodded along. Normal stuff. She asked if I'd ever cheated before. That caught me off guard a little because we hadn't even finished appetizers yet. I told her no. She stared at me for a second like she was scanning my face for cracks. Then she smiled again. She kept her phone face up on the table the entire time. Every few minutes she would check it, but not like she was texting someone. More like she was checking something specific. Notifications would pop up and she glanced down fast, then back at me. When the food came, she barely touched it. She mostly just watched me eat. Not in a romantic way. More like she was making sure I stayed there. The photo thing happened after we'd been there maybe 40 minutes. The waiter seemed confused but took her phone and snapped a few pictures. She made sure to look really close to me in them, hand on my arm, smiling wide. After he handed her phone back, she immediately started tapping on the screen. I asked what the proof was for. She said it was just for her safety, that she liked to document things. That sounded responsible at first, but something about the way she said document felt off, like she wasn't just saving a memory. I tried to brush it off. Asked her about her new apartment. She said she lived about 15 minutes away. She described it in detail. Top floor, corner unit, gray carpet, weird stain near the hallway. She talked like she was giving a tour. Then she asked if anyone knew I was here tonight. I said yeah, my roommate knew, which was true. I texted him earlier. She nodded slowly like she was checking something off in her head. About 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed. She looked down and her face changed. Not scared, not surprised, just focused. She excused herself and stepped away from the table, still holding her phone. I sat there watching the skyline, trying not to overthink everything. Maybe proof meant she sends her friends a picture of every guy she meets. Maybe she had bad dates before. Maybe she was just careful. When she came back, she was smiling again, too calm. She asked me if I'd ever been accused of anything before. I laughed awkwardly and said like what? She didn't answer directly. She just said that sometimes people show you who they are and you have to be ready. I felt this tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw a message from an unknown number. It was a photo. The photo she had just taken of us. Under it was a caption that said currently with him at rooftop terrace downtown, just in case. My stomach dropped. Another message came right after. This is timestamped and shared. I looked up at her. She was watching me carefully. I asked if she sent it. She nodded. She said she always sends a live update to a few people whenever she's on a date, so that it keeps men accountable. I said accountable for what? She leaned back and told me that if anything went wrong tonight, she had proof that we were together. Proof of the time, the place, my face. She said it like she was proud of herself. I tried to stay calm, told her I had no intention of doing anything wrong. She smiled and said you never know. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She said she had already scheduled a post. I asked what that meant. She explained that if she didn't deactivate it before midnight, a story would automatically go up on her social media saying she had been harmed by the man she was out with my photo attached. My head felt like it was buzzing. I asked why she would do that. She said it was protection, that she'd been ghosted before, that she'd been humiliated before, that she wasn't going to let anyone disappear on her again. I told her I wasn't planning on disappearing. It was literally our first date. She shrugged and said men say that. I suddenly realized the proof wasn't about safety from violence. It was about control. If I left, if I decided I didn't like her, if I blocked her later, that post would go up. And she'd have a photo of us at dinner to back up whatever story she wanted to tell. I felt trapped in a completely different way than I expected that night. I tried to keep the mood neutral, didn't want to trigger anything. Asked her about movies, about her hobbies, anything to steer away from the scheduled post thing. She kept bringing it back to loyalty, to commitment, to how people need consequences. The sky got darker around us. The rooftop lights flickered on brighter. Other tables were laughing, taking selfies, living normal lives. Meanwhile, I was calculating the time. It was 9:17. Midnight felt way too close. I asked if she would cancel it now that everything was fine. She said she would, eventually. Eventually wasn't good enough. Another message came through on my phone. This time it was a screenshot. She had added my name under the photo with a draft caption implying I had pressured her into meeting, that she felt unsafe but was staying calm. My chest felt tight. I asked her why she would write that when none of it was true. She said it was leverage. Just in case. I realized then that she didn't actually care about the date. She cared about control, about having something over someone. I told her I needed some air and stood up. She grabbed my wrist lightly, not hard enough to cause a scene, but enough to make her point. She reminded me that midnight was getting closer. I sat back down. I stayed for another hour, nodding, smiling when she smiled, making sure she had no reason to feel rejected. At 11:42, she finally picked up her phone and started tapping, She showed me the screen. She deleted the scheduled post. Right in front of me. She said, "See, I trust you now." I didn't feel relieved. I felt watched. When the bill came, I paid $41 total. I didn't even think about it. I just wanted out. We walked to the elevator together. She hugged me goodbye like everything had been perfect. As soon as I got home, I checked her social media. She had already posted the photo. The caption just said "first date success." But in the comments, someone asked if she felt safe, and she replied, "Not yet." I didn't even realize he'd been looking at the exit until he pointed it out. That's the part that gets me. He had been glancing over my shoulder every few minutes since we sat down, but I thought he was just distracted. Maybe nervous. Maybe checking out who was walking in. Normal stuff. Then he leaned forward, lowered his voice slightly, and said we had about 40 minutes before someone might interrupt. And just like that, the entire vibe of the night shifted. We were at this tiny art house theater that also had a cafe attached to it. Not a regular movie theater. This place showed old films and foreign stuff. Dim lighting, weird abstract paintings on the walls, mismatched chairs. The kind of place that feels cozy, but also a little isolated. He picked it. Said it was quieter than most places and better for talking. We met online through a book forum. He commented on a review I read, and we started messaging from there. He seemed smart. Kind of intense, but in an interesting way. He always typed in full sentences. No emojis. No slang, which was different from most guys I'd talked to. He offered to buy tickets. They were $14 each. Not bad. He sent me the confirmation screenshot earlier that day. When I got there, he was already inside waiting, sitting at a small round table near the back of the cafe. His back was to the wall, and he had a clear view of the entrance. I didn't think about that at the time. He stood up when he saw me, polite, smiled, pulled out my chair. Everything felt normal at first. He asked about my week. I asked about his job. He said he worked in data security, which sounded cool and slightly intimidating. We ordered coffee. Mine was $6. His was $5. He paid without hesitation. But even while we were talking, he kept checking the exit. Not his phone. Not his watch. The exit. At first, I thought maybe he was waiting for a friend or something, but he never mentioned anyone else coming. About 20 minutes into the conversation, he said it. He said we had around 40 minutes before someone might interrupt. I laughed awkwardly and asked what he meant. He said it like it was obvious, like he was calculating something. He explained that he doesn't usually get this much uninterrupted time, that someone tends to show up when he stays in one place too long. I felt this slow wave of confusion wash over me. I asked who would show up. He shrugged and said it depends. That wasn't an answer. I tried to brush it off as a weird joke. Maybe he had a clingy friend. Maybe an ex who still followed him around. But he didn't smile after saying it. He just kept watching the door. The theater lights flickered slightly as people started lining up for the next showing. I noticed how empty the cafe area was getting. Most people were moving toward the screening rooms. He didn't move. He said we didn't need to see the film right away, that we had time. I checked my phone casually. 7:18 p.m. 40 minutes would put us at around 8 p.m. I asked if he was expecting someone specific. He said not exactly. More like eventually someone always notices. My chest felt tight. He leaned closer and said he tries to rotate locations so he doesn't create patterns. But tonight, he wanted to take a risk. I stared at him. A risk with what? He started talking about surveillance, about how easy it is to track someone's habits if they go to the same cafe every week. He mentioned facial recognition in public cameras. He talked about digital footprints like they were living things that follow you around. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked if someone was tracking him. He said everyone is tracked. Some people just realize it sooner. The way he said it made it sound personal. Another glance at the exit. He adjusted his seat slightly so we had an even clearer view of the door. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The security camera in the corner of the cafe. The reflection in the glass door. The fact that his phone was face down and it powered off. I asked why his phone was off. He said it's easier to disappear that way. That word disappear made my stomach twist. He started asking me strange questions. How often I post online, if I tag locations in real time, if I share my routines. He asked if anyone knew I was here tonight. I said my sister knew. He nodded slowly. Then he said that might complicate things. Complicate what? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he checked his watch. 30 minutes left, he said quietly. I felt like I was stuck in someone else's plan. A group of people walked into the cafe laughing loudly. He immediately stiffened. His eyes locked onto them until they moved toward the theater doors. False alarm, he muttered. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I asked him straight up if someone was going to interrupt us because he owed them money or something. He almost smiled at that. He said it wasn't about money, it was about observation. He explained that for the past few months he's been testing how long he can stay in one public place before someone from a certain group notices and approaches him. I felt cold all over. I asked what group. He hesitated, then said people who monitor patterns. That's when I realized he genuinely believed this. He believed someone was tracking him physically, not just online. He believed there were watchers. I tried to keep my tone calm and asked if he'd ever been confronted before. He nodded. Said once at a train station, someone stood too close for too long. Another time, a woman in a bookstore asked too many questions. I asked what happened. He said he left before they could confirm anything. Confirm what? He looked at me like I was missing something obvious. Then he said he chose this cafe tonight because it had multiple exits. Front door, back hallway, emergency stairwell. I had not noticed the emergency stairwell. He had. 20 minutes left, he said. I felt trapped even though we were in a public place. I started thinking about how far my car was parked, about how fast I could get to it. I texted my sister under the table. Just wrote call me in 10 minutes. He noticed me typing. He asked if I was alerting someone. I said no, just checking the message. He studied my face for a second too long. Then he said, if someone interrupts, don't panic. Just follow my lead. That sentence made everything worse. Follow his lead where? The cafe was almost empty now. Most people were in the theater rooms. The lighting felt dimmer somehow. He leaned back and stared at the exit again. 10 minutes left. A man in a gray jacket walked in and stood near the counter, ordered a drink, glanced around casually. My date went completely still. His eyes locked onto the man. He whispered that this might be it. My heart started racing. The man in gray just stood there waiting for his coffee, scrolling on his phone. Totally normal. My date's breathing got faster. He said if the man looked at him twice, that would confirm it. The man glanced in our direction once. I felt like I was watching a bomb timer tick down. My sister's call came through right on time. My phone vibrated loudly in the quiet cafe. My date flinched hard, like actually jumped. The man in gray looked over at the sound. That was the second look. My date stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He grabbed my wrist and told me we had to go now. I pulled my hand away immediately and said I needed to take the call. He looked torn for a second, like he was deciding between running and staying. Then he bolted. Literally ran toward the back hallway. People in the cafe stared. The man in gray looked confused. I answered my sister and told her to stay on the line while I grabbed my things. I didn't follow him. I didn't look for him. I walked straight out the front door and into the street where it was loud and bright and normal. I never heard from him again. A week later, I saw his profile disappear from the forum. Sometimes I think about how calm he seemed at first, and how carefully he watched that exit. I should have lied. That's the first thing that hits me every time I replay that night in my head. I should have lied when she asked if anyone knew exactly where I was. I should have said yes. I should have said 3 people were tracking my location live. I should have made something up. Instead, I told the truth. And the way her shoulders dropped in relief when I said no still makes my stomach twist. We met through a random fitness group chat, not even a dating app. She messaged me after I posted about training for a half marathon. She said she was training too and wanted a running partner. We talked for about 10 days before meeting. She seemed chill, sarcastic, kind of blunt, but funny. She sent voice notes sometimes. Nothing about her felt off through a screen. She suggested meeting at this outdoor food truck park on the edge of town. It used to be an old warehouse lot that got turned into a night spot with string lights and picnic tables. It wasn't downtown. It was more on the industrial side, near storage units and empty buildings. But she said the tacos there were the best in the city. I got there around 8:30 p.m. The sun had just gone down. The lights overhead gave everything this yellow glow. There were maybe 20 people scattered around, not packed, but not empty either. She was already sitting at a picnic table toward the back, not near the entrance, more toward the fence line. I remember thinking she looked better than her pictures. Tall, dark hair pulled back, oversized hoodie. She stood up and hugged me quick, then sat back down. The first 10 minutes were normal. We talked about running routes, about work. She asked where I live. I told her the general area, but not my exact address. She nodded like that was fair. We ordered food. My tacos were $12. Hers were $11. We split a drink that was $6. Nothing felt dramatic, just a basic first date. About 15 minutes in, she asked if I could put my phone on silent. She said she hated the sound of notifications, said it ruined the vibe. That didn't seem crazy, so I flicked it to silent and set it face down on the table. She watched me do it. Then she asked if anyone knew I was here. I laughed a little and said my roommate knew I was going out with it, not the exact spot. I didn't send him the address or anything. That's when I saw it. That tiny shift in her face, like something unclenched. She leaned back slightly and said that was good, that she preferred when things were private. Private how? She said she didn't like outside interference, that too many people invite drama by constantly sharing their location. I started feeling this low buzz of unease in my chest. She asked if I usually share my live location with anyone. I said not really, only sometimes with family if I'm traveling. She nodded slowly. Then she reached across the table and gently pushed my phone a little farther away from me. Not aggressive, just subtle. The food truck started closing around 9:30. One by one, the lights inside them shut off. People began leaving in small groups. I hadn't realized how far back we were sitting until the crowd thinned out. The front entrance was a decent walk from where we were. Maybe not far, but far enough that it felt isolated. She kept glancing toward the parking lot, not like she was nervous, more like she was checking something. I asked if she came here often. She said she used to. Used to. That wording stuck with me. She started asking more personal questions. How often I run alone at night, whether I stick to the same route, whether anyone expects me home at a specific time. I answered casually at first, but after a while it started feeling like a survey. I asked why she wanted to know. She said she likes understanding people's patterns. Patterns. That word again. I joked that I hoped she wasn't profiling me. She didn't laugh. Instead, she said knowing someone's patterns makes them easier to find. My chest tightened. I tried to tell myself she meant it in a romantic way, like knowing someone's coffee order or gym schedule, but her tone wasn't soft. It was analytical. Around 10 p.m., there were maybe 5 other people left in the entire lot. She suggested we take a walk around the back of the warehouse. Said it was quieter and she liked the murals painted there. I hesitated for half a second, but didn't want to seem paranoid. We walked along the side of the building where the lights didn't quite reach. The air smelled like oil and metal. There were faded graffiti murals on the brick walls. Some were cool. Some were just tags. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I instinctively reached for it. She noticed. She said I thought you put it on silent. I said it is. She stopped walking and looked at me for a long second. Then she asked if I could turn it completely off. My heart skipped. I asked why. She said she just wanted us to be present. That word present felt heavy. I told her I preferred to keep it on, just in case. Her expression changed slightly. Not angry, more calculating. She stepped closer to me and said she appreciated honesty. Then she asked again if anyone knew exactly where I was. I repeated that no one had the location pinned, just that I was out for the night. Again, that small visible relief. She said good. We were standing near a side door of the warehouse. Metal door. No lights above it. just darkness. I noticed her gaze flick toward it for a split second, then back to me. She started talking about how easy it is for people to disappear in cities, how everyone assumes someone else will notice first, how sometimes days go by before anyone asks questions. My mouth felt dry. I asked her what she meant. She said nothing dramatic, just that people are careless with their safety. I stepped back slightly and said maybe we should head back toward the front where it's brighter. She didn't move. Instead, she reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key. She held it up casually and said this opens that door. My brain started racing. She said she sometimes rents storage space inside, that it's quieter back there, that we could sit without being disturbed. Disturbed by who? I looked around. The lot was almost empty now. I suddenly realized how boxed in the space felt. High fences. One main exit. I said I was good staying outside. She tilted her head slightly and studied me. Then she said it would be easier if I didn't make this complicated. That sentence cut through everything. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I took a step backward and said I needed to use the bathroom, that I left my phone at the table. She glanced toward the front lot, then back at me. For a second, I thought she might grab my arm. Instead, she smiled, too calm. She said fine. I walked fast. Not running, but fast enough that it probably looked weird. Once I hit the brighter part of the lot, I pulled my phone out and saw 3 missed notifications from my roommate. Nothing urgent, just memes. But seeing his name made everything feel real. I didn't go back. I walked straight to my car and locked the doors immediately. She texted me 10 minutes later. Just one message. You left too soon. I never replied. 2 days later, I drove past that warehouse during the day. The food truck lot looked smaller, emptier. And that side door she pointed to had a heavy padlock on it. I knew the exact second the date stopped being normal. It wasn't when he asked what time I usually go to sleep. That by itself is just small talk. People ask about routines all the time. What time do you wake up? Do you work early? Are you a night person? Harmless stuff. It was when he corrected me, and not in a joking way. We met at this late-night bookstore cafe that stays open until midnight. It's not fancy, just a quiet place with shelves along the walls and small lamps on every table. I picked it because it felt safe. Public, bright, and calm. Plus, I actually like reading while sipping coffee. We matched on a dating app 3 days earlier. He seemed polite, a little serious, but respectful. He asked thoughtful questions. Didn't rush anything. No red flags through text. When he walked in, he looked exactly like his pictures. Dark jacket, clean sneakers, calm smile. He waved when he saw me. Nothing about him screamed danger. We ordered drinks at the counter. Mine was $7, his was $6. He insisted on paying. We sat near the window where I could see the street outside. For the first half hour, everything felt fine. We talked about work. He works in logistics, something about supply chains. He explained it in detail, but not in a boring way. I told him about my job and how I live in a small apartment near campus. He asked a lot of questions. Not in a rapid-fire way, just steady, like he was building a file. What floor do you live on? Do you have roommates? Do you cook at home or order out? How thin are your walls? That last one stuck with me. I laughed and said pretty thin. Why? He shrugged and said he was just curious about noise. I didn't think too much about it. Around 9:30, the place started emptying out. Students packing up laptops, couples leaving with tote bags full of books. The lamps felt brighter as the room got quieter. That's when he leaned in slightly and asked what time I usually go to sleep. I said around midnight most nights, sometimes 12:30 if I'm binge watching something. He tilted his head a little. Then he said no, it's usually 11:47. My brain paused. I laughed awkwardly and said no, definitely closer to midnight. He didn't smile. He just nodded slowly and repeated that he thought it was 11:47 most nights. I felt this cold little knot form in my stomach. I asked why he thought that. He said he notices patterns. That word again, patterns. He said people think their routines vary, but most of them are predictable within a few minutes. I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was guessing. Maybe he thought it sounded smart. I told him my schedule changes all the time. He said not really. Then he started listing days. Monday 11:44, Tuesday 11:50, Wednesday 11:46. My mouth went dry. I asked what he was talking about. He said those were the times my bedroom light went off last week. I stared at him. He didn't look like he was joking. I felt my heartbeat start pounding in my ears. I asked how he would know that. He looked almost confused by my confusion. He said your building faces the street, the top corner unit, second window from the left. That's my apartment. He described the faint blue glow of my tea before it goes dark. He mentioned how sometimes the light flickers because my curtain doesn't fully close. I couldn't breathe right. I asked if he had been near my building. He said he likes walking at night. Helps him think. My hands were shaking under the table. I replayed the last week in my head. Had I noticed anyone outside? Any parked cars lingering? Any footsteps? Nothing. He leaned back and took a sip of his drink like he just commented on the weather. I asked why he would be watching my window. He said he wanted to make sure I was safe before meeting in person. Safe from what? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked if anyone else watches my building. I said no. He nodded like that was good news. My brain was scrambling for logic. Maybe he lives nearby. Maybe he happened to walk past. Maybe he exaggerated. But he was too specific. He even mentioned the night I stayed up later because I had a headache. Said the light didn't go off until 12:18 that night. That was true. I never posted that anywhere. I started scanning the cafe. There were maybe 6 people left. 2 employees behind the counter. Soft music playing. Everything looked normal. But inside my chest, everything felt wrong. I asked him how many nights he had been near my apartment. He thought for a second. Then said almost every night for the past 8 days. 8 days. We had only been talking for 3. That means he found my building before we even agreed to meet. I never gave him my exact address. I only mentioned the neighborhood. He said it wasn't hard to narrow it down based on photos I'd posted months ago. Angles, background buildings, reflections in windows. I felt exposed in a way I can't explain. He said he wanted to understand my schedule before meeting to reduce unpredictability. Reduce unpredictability. I asked if he had ever tried to come inside. He smiled slightly and said no, not yet. That yet hit me like a punch. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. He didn't move. He just looked up at me calmly. He said, if you're worried, don't be. I'm not interested in hurting you. I just like knowing things. Knowing things. I grabbed my bag and said I needed air. He didn't try to stop me. He just said I'd probably turn off my light around 12:05 tonight because I'd be unsettled. My chest felt tight as I walked toward the door. Outside, the street was bright and loud compared to the quiet bookstore. I pulled out my phone and immediately called my sister. I told her everything in one breath. When I looked back through the cafe window, he was still sitting there, watching me. Not angry. Not panicked. Just observing. I went home that night and didn't turn my bedroom light off at all. I slept with every lamp on. The next evening, around 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just one message. Later than usual. I honestly thought she was joking when she said it. Like I actually laughed at first. We were maybe 20 minutes into the date when she leaned back in her chair, looked at me dead serious, and said she hated wasting time. Then she asked if I'd prefer a quick ending or a drawn-out one. She didn't smile after. That's when my laugh just kind of died in my throat. We met at this weird indoor mini-golf place that also had a bar and arcade games. Not a romantic spot, but it was loud and public and kind of chaotic, which usually makes first dates less awkward. Colored lights everywhere, fake palm trees, glowing golf balls. The music was too loud and the floor was sticky in random spots. She picked it, said she liked games because they reveal who people really are. I got there first. Paid for both of us at the counter because she said she'd pay me back. It was $18 per person. They handed me 2 neon wristbands. When she walked in, she looked different than her pictures. Not worse, but sharper somehow. Her eyes were intense, like she was constantly measuring something. She hugged me quickly and scanned the place before focusing on me. The first hole was this fake volcano thing that spit out fog every few minutes. We took turns putting. She barely reacted when she missed. Just watched the ball roll away like she expected it. We talked about normal stuff. Work, hobbies, music. She was blunt. Not rude exactly, just very direct. She asked what I wanted long term. Kids, marriage, that kind of stuff. I said I wasn't sure yet. Still figuring things out. She nodded slowly like she was filing that away. By the 4th hole, she had already beaten me twice. She didn't celebrate. She just kept her expression neutral. That's when we sat down at a high table near the arcade machines to grab drinks. Mine was $9. Hers was $11. She paid that time without saying anything. She took a sip and then just stared at me. No blinking. Then she said she hated wasting time. I asked what she meant. She said she prefers clarity, that dragging things out is inefficient. I tried to keep it light and said I agree, communication is important. That's when she asked the question. Quick ending or drawn out one? My brain couldn't even process it properly. I asked ending to what? She shrugged slightly and said to this. I looked around like maybe there was a hidden camera. Maybe this was some social experiment. She didn't look amused. She explained that she already had a sense of how this was going to go. She said she can tell within 30 minutes whether someone fits into her plan or not. Plan. That word made my stomach tighten. I asked what plan. She said the future. Her timeline. She has everything mapped out. Career milestones. Marriage by a certain age. First child by another. She doesn't believe in drifting. I said that's organized. She nodded, but didn't smile. Then she said if she doesn't see potential, she prefers to end things decisively. No ghosting. No fading out. Just clean. I said that sounds fair. But the way she kept looking at me made it feel like more than just dating preferences. She leaned closer and said she could end this right now. Quick, efficient, or she could let it stretch out. Give me time to realize I don't fit before she cuts it off. I laughed nervously again. She didn't. There was something about the way she said cut it off that felt too literal. We went back to playing mini golf. She was quieter now, watching me more than the game. At one point, she asked how I usually handle rejection. I said I handle it fine. It's part of life. She asked if I ever get angry. I said not really. She studied my face like she was checking for cracks. Around the 7th hole, she purposely hit her ball too hard and it bounced off the course onto the floor. She didn't react, just watched it roll under a bench. Then she said people sometimes react unpredictably when they think something's being taken from them. I asked if she meant relationships. She said control. That word hung in the air between us. I started feeling like this wasn't about compatibility, it was about testing. She asked if I'd ever felt powerless. I said everyone has at some point. She nodded and said she doesn't like feeling powerless. Ever. I noticed then that she kept glancing at the exit doors. Not like she wanted to leave. More like she was calculating something. We finished the course in silence. When we returned to our clubs, she suggested we sit somewhere quieter to talk. I hesitated but agreed. Still public, still bright. We sat at a corner booth near the back wall. Fewer people around. The music wasn't as loud there. She folded her hands on the table and asked if I believed in fate. I said not strongly. She said she does, but not in a romantic way. More like probability. She explained that she doesn't leave major outcomes to chance. She nudges them. That phrase made my chest tighten. I asked how she nudges outcomes. She said sometimes by removing variables. I didn't like where this was going. Then she leaned forward again and asked me directly if I'd prefer a quick ending or a drawn-out one. This time, there was no joking tone at all. I asked what that would look like. She said quick would mean she stands up, blocks me, and I never hear from her again. Drawn out would mean she keeps seeing me while slowly dismantling the parts she doesn't like until I either change or break. My mouth went dry. I asked if she was serious. She said it completely. She talked about relationships like projects, like things to be engineered. I started noticing small details, the way she tracked my reactions, the way she barely blinked when she said break. I asked if she's ever done that before. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked if I scared easily. I said not usually. She tilted her head slightly and said good. Then she said sometimes drawn out endings are more educational. Educational. Like I was some kind of case study. I suddenly felt like I was being evaluated for something way bigger than a first date. My phone buzzed in my pocket. She glanced down immediately. She asked who that was. I said probably my friend. She asked if I told anyone I was here. I said yeah, I always do on first dates. Her expression changed slightly. Not angry, just thoughtful. She said that complicates things. I asked what things. She leaned back and finally smiled. Then she said maybe quick is better after all. And she stood up. No hug, no goodbye. Just stood up and walked toward the exit. I sat there for a second, confused. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. One message. You picked the wrong one. I never saw her again. But 2 weeks later, someone created a fake profile using my photos and started messaging people in my area. The bio said testing outcomes. I knew I shouldn't have taken the second sip. Even before he said anything weird, even before my head started feeling heavy, something about the way he ordered for both of us made my stomach twist. We met at this underground cocktail lounge that I didn't even know existed until he sent me the address. It was below a bakery downtown. You had to walk through a side door, down a narrow staircase, and into this dim brick basement with low ceilings and soft yellow lights. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Maybe 15 people scattered around small round tables. He picked it because he said it was intimate. Not loud like normal bars. We'd been talking for about a week. Met through a friend of a friend on social media. He seemed confident. Older than me by a few years. He said he knew good spots in the city that most people missed. I got there a few minutes late. He was already sitting at the bar, talking to the bartender like they knew each other. That made me feel slightly better at first, like he was familiar with the place. He stood up when he saw me and smiled. He looked exactly like his photos. Clean shirt, watch on his wrist, calm energy. We sat at a small table in the corner, close to the wall. I opened the menu and started scanning it. I'm not even a big drinker, but I like knowing what I'm getting. Before I could decide, he closed my menu gently and told me he'd order for us. I laughed and said I'm kind of picky. He said trust me. Something about that phrase felt heavier than it should have. He waved the bartender over and ordered 2 of the same thing. Didn't even ask what I liked. I tried to keep it casual and asked what it was. He said a house specialty. Something herbal. Something that works better when shared. Works better. I asked what that meant. He smiled slightly and said you'll see. The drinks came in short glasses. Clear liquid with a slice of lemon floating on top. It didn't smell strong, just slightly sweet. He lifted his glass and waited for me to lift mine. I did. We clinked lightly. I took a small sip. It tasted normal at first, kind of citrusy, a little bitter after. He watched me closely. I set it down. He took a bigger gulp of his and then nodded toward mine like he was checking my progress. We started talking about normal stuff. Where we live, what we do for work. He asked about my family. I asked about his. But every few minutes, his eyes flicked down to my glass. I was maybe a quarter of the way through it when he asked if I was going to finish it. I said probably not all at once. He leaned in slightly and said it works better that way. My stomach tightened. I asked works better for what? He said for the effect. I felt this wave of unease roll through me. I asked what effect. He shrugged and said relaxation, connection. People open up more when they commit. Commit to what? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he picked up his glass and finished it in one go, then set it down hard on the table and looked at me expectantly. I stared at my drink. It suddenly felt heavier. I told him I'm not a big drinker. He said it's mild, that he wouldn't order anything unsafe. Unsafe. Why use that word unless it crossed his mind? I took another small sip, mostly to avoid making it awkward. About 5 minutes later, I started feeling warm. Not drunk exactly, just flushed, like my skin was buzzing slightly. I told myself it was just nerves. He asked if I felt it yet. My heart skipped. I said, felt what? He smiled and said the shift. Shift. I looked around the room. Everything looked normal. People laughing quietly. Bartender wiping glasses. Music low in the background. But my thoughts felt slightly slower. He reached across the table and nudged my glass closer to me. He said, finish it. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just firm. I said, I'm good for now. He leaned back and sighed slightly like I was ruining something. Then he said it works better when both people finish it. Both people. Like it was some kind of experiment. I started replaying everything in my head. Did I see the bartender make it? Did he bring it straight from the bar? Did he leave it unattended? I realized I hadn't been watching closely. He asked if I trust him. I said trust takes time. He nodded slowly and said time is exactly what we don't have. That sentence made my chest tighten. I asked what he meant. He glanced at his watch. Then he said the peak doesn't last long unless you finish it. Peak. My head felt slightly heavier now, like there was cotton behind my eyes. I pushed the glass away from me. He immediately reached forward and slid it back. His fingers lingered on the rim. He said if you don't finish it, it'll be uneven. Uneven how? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked if anyone knew where I was tonight. My pulse spiked. I said my sister knows the area. He nodded but didn't look convinced. Then he said it's better when people don't interfere. Interfere with what? My thoughts were moving slower now, like trying to run in water. I reached for my phone. He noticed instantly. He asked who I was texting. I said no one, just checking something. He leaned forward and placed his hand over mine on the table. His hand was steady. Mine wasn't. He said stay present. I pulled my hand away. The room felt slightly tilted. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt off. Not collapsing, just unsteady. He stood up too quickly. He said maybe we should get some air. I said I'm fine. He said fresh air will help it work faster. That phrase snapped something in my brain. Work faster. I grabbed my phone and typed out my location to my sister as fast as I could. My fingers felt clumsy. He watched me. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Like I'd messed up his plan. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He said that's normal. Normal for what? I forced myself to focus. Breathe slow. Stay upright. I walked toward the bar and asked the bartender quietly what was in the drink. The bartender looked confused. He listed normal ingredients. Nothing strange. I asked if anything else was added. He said no. I glanced back at the table. My date was watching me, completely still. I realized something then. Maybe it wasn't the drink. Maybe it was suggestion. The way he kept saying it would work, the way he planted the idea of an effect, the way he tracked every reaction. My body reacted because my brain believed something was happening. I grabbed a bottle of water from the bar and drank half of it in one go. My head started clearing slightly. He walked over slowly. He said, "You broke the flow." I said, "I'm leaving." He didn't try to stop me. He just said it would have been better if he finished it. I walked up the stairs and out into the street. The cool air hit my face and everything felt sharper. My phone buzzed. A text from him. Next time, don't hesitate. There was no next time. I didn't think a photo album could make my skin crawl until that night. It wasn't even hidden. She showed it to me like it was something cute, like people showing vacation pictures or pet photos. She just unlocked her phone, swiped a few times, and turned the screen toward me with this calm little smile. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of photos, first dates, all different guys. And every single one of them looked nervous. We met at this open-air night market that pops up every Friday near the old train tracks. String lights everywhere, food stalls, live acoustic music in the background. It was busy but not packed, the kind of place where you can disappear into the crowd but still feel safe. She picked it, said she liked casual first dates because they show real reactions. We'd matched on an app about a week before. She seemed funny, sarcastic. She sent voice messages that sounded relaxed. Nothing dramatic. She even joked about bad first dates she'd had in the past. When I got there, she was standing near a food truck that sold grilled sandwiches. Black jacket, jeans, hair tied back. She smiled and waved when she saw me. We ordered food. Mine was $13. Hers was $12. She insisted on paying her half. Said she liked balance. We found a small standing table near the edge of the market, close to a fence that overlooked the tracks. You could hear trains passing in the distance every now and then. At first, it felt normal. We talked about work. She works in marketing. She travels sometimes. She asked what I do on weekends. Basic stuff. She asked if I get nervous on first dates. I laughed and said a little. She nodded like that was expected. Then she said she likes capturing moments. I thought she meant like memories. After maybe 30 minutes, she asked if we could take a photo together. I hesitated slightly but agreed. It's not that weird. People document everything now. She held her phone up and snapped a selfie with both of us in frame. She made sure the lights behind us were visible, the market sign glowing in the background. She looked at the photo and smiled. Then she said something about adding it to the collection. I thought she was joking. I asked what collection. That's when she opened her gallery. At first, I just saw thumbnails, rows and rows of pictures, mostly selfies. She started scrolling, and I realized every single photo was her with a different guy. Different settings, restaurants, parks, coffee shops, bars, arcades. But the pattern was the same. Her smiling calmly. The guy next to her looking slightly tense. Some of them were subtle, just a tight smile, stiff posture. Others looked visibly uncomfortable, eyes wide, jaw clenched, like they didn't know what was happening. I felt my stomach drop. I asked if those were all first dates. She nodded proudly, said she keeps track. Track of what? She said reactions. She zoomed in on one photo from a rooftop bar. The guy looked mid-laugh, but his eyes were darting off to the side. She said he started sweating when she asked about long-term plans. She swiped to another, a guy at a bowling alley gripping the ball too tightly. She said he lied about something small and she caught it. Each photo had a story. Each guy had a flaw. She said she studies them later, their body language, their micro-expressions. I tried to laugh it off and said that's intense. She didn't laugh. She said first dates reveal everything if you know how to look. I started feeling self-conscious, wondering what my face looked like right now. She took another look at the selfie we just took. She zoomed in slightly. Then she looked up at me and tilted her head. She said I always look a little more alert once they realize what I'm doing. Doing what? She said documenting. I asked why she keeps them. She said data. That word made my chest tighten. She said patterns matter. That after enough samples, you start to see which type lasts longer. Which type what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she kept scrolling. I noticed some photos had small marks in the corner, like stars, 1 star, 2 stars, 3. I asked what those meant. She said ratings. My mouth felt dry. I asked based on what? She said potential. I asked how many stars I had. She looked at the screen, then at me. She said it's too early to assign one. Something about that felt worse than if she just said one. The market music shifted to a slower song. A couple near us started dancing casually. She didn't look away from me. She asked if I'm comfortable being part of her archive. Archive. Like I was a file. I said I didn't know I was signing up for that. She said everyone signs up for something. She started telling me about a guy from 3 months ago who didn't make it past date 2. Said he tried to back out after she showed him the gallery. She said he looked pale in the photo she took right after. She swiped to it. And there he was, sitting at a cafe table, forced smile, eyes slightly panicked. She zoomed in on his face. She said, "Fear is honest." My heart started beating harder. I realized something else. In every single photo, the guy didn't look like he knew he was being evaluated. They all looked like normal first date smiles. But she saw something else in them. She asked if I wanted to see what she sees in mine. I'd hesitated but nodded. She zoomed into our selfie. She pointed at my jaw. Said it tightened when she mentioned the collection. She pointed at my eyes. Said they shifted left when she talked about ratings. I felt exposed in a way I can't explain. Like she wasn't just taking pictures. She was dissecting them. She said she usually decides by the end of the night if someone is worth a second date. I asked what happens if they're not. She shrugged. Said they stay in the gallery. I asked if she ever deletes them. She shook her head. Said records are important. I started noticing that some of the photos were taken in places not fully public, quieter corners, darker settings. I asked if all those guys knew she kept their photos. She smiled slightly and said they agreed to the selfie. That wasn't the same thing. A train roared past behind us suddenly, loud enough to make the table vibrate. I flinched. She noticed. She said, "See." "See what?" She said, "Heightened awareness." She seemed pleased. I checked my phone subtly and saw a text from my friend asking how it was going. I typed back, "Weird." She noticed me typing. She asked if I was describing her. I said, "Just giving an update." She nodded and said transparency is good. Then she asked if I'd like to see the folder labeled incomplete. My stomach dropped. I said, "What does that mean?" She said dates that ended abruptly. She started to open it. I stopped her. I said, "I think I'm good." She looked at me carefully for a long second. Then she said, "Interesting." "Interesting how?" She said most of them stay to prove they're not like the others. I didn't respond. I just said I should probably head out soon, early morning tomorrow. She nodded calmly. Before I could step away, she raised her phone one more time and snapped another picture. This one was just of me. No warning. She lowered the phone and smiled. She said that one captures it better. Captures what? She didn't answer. I walked away without looking back. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I searched her name on social media. Her account was public. And there it was. A highlight section labeled firsts. Dozens of faces, including mine. I knew I shouldn't have taken the second sip. Even before he said anything weird, even before my head started feeling heavy, something about the way he ordered for both of us made my stomach twist. We met at this underground cocktail lounge that I didn't even know existed until he sent me the address. It was below a bakery downtown. You had to walk through a side door, down a narrow staircase, and into this dim brick basement with low ceilings and soft yellow lights. It wasn't crowded, but it wasn't empty either. Maybe 15 people scattered around small round tables. He picked it because he said it was intimate, not loud like normal bars. We'd been talking for about a week, met through a friend of a friend on social media. He seemed confident, older than me by a few years. He said he knew good spots in the city that most people missed. I got there a few minutes late. He was already sitting at the bar, talking to the bartender like they knew each other. That made me feel slightly better at first, like he was familiar with the place. He stood up when he saw me and smiled. He looked exactly like his photos. Clean shirt, watch on his wrist, calm energy. We sat at a small table in the corner, close to the wall. I opened the menu and started scanning it. I'm not even a big drinker, but I like knowing what I'm getting. Before I could decide, he closed my menu gently and told me he'd order for us. I laughed and said I'm kind of picky. He said, "Trust me." Something about that phrase felt heavier than it should have. He waved the bartender over and ordered two of the same thing. Didn't even ask what I liked. I tried to keep it casual and asked what it was. He said a house specialty. Something herbal. Something that works better when shared. Works better. I asked what that meant. He smiled slightly and said, "You'll see." The drinks came in short glasses. Clear liquid with a slice of lemon floating on top. It didn't smell strong, just slightly sweet. He lifted his glass and waited for me to lift mine. I did. We clinked lightly. I took a small sip. It tasted normal at first, kind of citrusy, a little bitter after. He watched me closely. I set it down. He took a bigger gulp of his and then nodded toward mine like he was checking my progress. We started talking about normal stuff. Where we live, what we do for work. He asked about my family. I asked about his. But every few minutes, his eyes flicked down to my glass. I was maybe a quarter of the way through it when he asked if I was going to finish it. I said probably not all at once. He leaned in slightly and said it works better that way. My stomach tightened. I asked works better for what? He said for the effect. I felt this wave of unease roll through me. I asked what effect. He shrugged and said relaxation, connection. People open up more when they commit. Commit to what? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he picked up his glass and finished it in one go, then set it down hard on the table and looked at me expectantly. I stared at my drink. It suddenly felt heavier. I told him I'm not a big drinker. He said it's mild, that he wouldn't order anything unsafe. Unsafe. Why use that word unless it crossed his mind? I took another small sip, mostly to avoid making it awkward. About 5 minutes later, I started feeling warm. Not drunk exactly, just flushed, like my skin was buzzing slightly. I told myself it was just nerves. He asked if I felt it yet. My heart skipped. I said felt what? He smiled and said the shift. Shift. I looked around the room. Everything looked normal. People laughing quietly. Bartender wiping glasses. Music low in the background. But my thoughts felt slightly slower. He reached across the table and nudged my glass closer to me. He said finish it. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just firm. I said I'm good for now. He leaned back and sighed slightly like I was ruining something. Then he said it works better when both people finish it. Both people. Like it was some kind of experiment. I started replaying everything in my head. Did I see the bartender make it? Did he bring it straight from the bar? Did he leave it unattended? I realized I hadn't been watching closely. He asked if I trust him. I said trust takes time. He nodded slowly and said time is exactly what we don't have. That sentence made my chest tighten. I asked what he meant. He glanced at his watch. Then he said the peak doesn't last long unless you finish it. Peak. My head felt slightly heavier now, like there was cotton behind my eyes. I pushed the glass away from me. He immediately reached forward and slid it back. His fingers lingered on the rim. He said if you don't finish it, it'll be uneven. Uneven how? He didn't answer. Instead, he asked if anyone knew where I was tonight. My pulse spiked. I said my sister knows the area. He nodded but didn't look convinced. Then he said it's better when people don't interfere. Interfere with what? My thoughts were moving slower now, like trying to run in water. I reached for my phone. He noticed instantly. He asked who I was texting. I said no one, just checking something. He leaned forward and placed his hand over mine on the table. His hand was steady. Mine wasn't. He said stay present. I pulled my hand away. The room felt slightly tilted. I tried to stand up, but my legs felt off. Not collapsing, just unsteady. He stood up too quickly. He said maybe we should get some air. I said I'm fine. He said fresh air will help it work faster. That phrase snapped something in my brain. Work faster. I grabbed my phone and typed out my location to my sister as fast as I could. My fingers felt clumsy. He watched me. His expression wasn't angry. It was disappointed. Like I'd messed up his plan. I told him I wasn't feeling well. He said that's normal. Normal for what? I forced myself to focus. Breathe slow. Stay upright. I walked toward the bar and asked the bartender quietly what was in the drink. The bartender looked confused. He listed normal ingredients. Nothing strange. I asked if anything else was added. He said no. I glanced back at the table. My date was watching me, completely still. I realized something then. Maybe it wasn't the drink. Maybe it was suggestion. The way he kept saying it would work, the way he planted the idea of an effect, the way he tracked every reaction. My body reacted because my brain believed something was happening. I grabbed a bottle of water from the bar and drank half of it in one go. My head started clearing slightly. He walked over slowly. He said, "You broke the flow." I said, "I'm leaving." He didn't try to stop me. He just said it would have been better if he finished it. I walked up the stairs and out into the street. The cool air hit my face and everything felt sharper. My phone buzzed. A text from him. "Next time, don't hesitate." There was no next time. I should have gotten out of the car the second she offered to drive. That's the part that replays in my head the most. Not the moment the locks clicked, not the question she asked, but the second I chose convenience over instinct. We met at a late-night street fair near the waterfront. Food stalls, small pop-up shops, some local artists selling prints. It wasn't super crowded, but busy enough that you could blend in. I drove there myself. She drove too. We agreed to meet by the Ferris wheel at the end of the pier. She looked exactly like her pictures. Blonde hair, black leather jacket, confident posture. She smiled when she saw me and gave me a quick side hug like we already knew each other. We walked around for about an hour, tried a few food samples, listened to some live music. Everything felt easy. She was funny in a dry way. She made sarcastic comments about the overpriced lemonade that was $8 and laughed when I said I could make the same thing at home for $2. We talked about work. She said she freelances and likes having control over her schedule. She used that word a lot. Control. Not in a loud way. Just casually, like it was important. Around 10:45, the vendors started packing up. The lights along the pier dimmed slightly. The air got colder. She asked if I wanted to go somewhere quieter to talk. Maybe drive up to the overlook above the water. It was only 5 minutes away. Good view of the skyline at night. I hesitated for a second, but told myself it was still public, still near the city. I said sure. We walked to our cars. That's when she suggested we take her car instead of driving separately. She said parking at the overlook can be tight, and it's easier with one vehicle. I thought about it. Then I agreed. I got into the passenger seat of her car. It smelled faintly like vanilla air freshener. The interior was clean, almost too clean. No clutter. No random receipts. Nothing. She started the engine and pulled out of the lot smoothly. The road to the overlook was dark and slightly winding. Streetlights were spaced far apart. The city lights faded behind us. We made small talk at first, about how quiet it gets up here at night, about how most people don't know this spot exists. She seemed relaxed, one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually near the gear shift. When we reached the overlook, there were only 2 other cars parked there, both at the far end of the lot. She parked near the edge facing the water. The view really was nice. City skyline reflecting on the water. Soft hum of traffic in distance. She turned off the engine but left the radio on low. We sat there for a second in silence. Then she turned slightly toward me and asked if I trusted her. I opened my mouth to answer. That's when I heard the sound. Click. All 4 doors locking at once. Automatic, immediate. My brain took half a second to catch up. I looked at her. She was still facing me, watching my reaction. I asked why she locked the doors. She said it's safer that way. Safer from what? She shrugged and said you never know who might walk up. I glanced at the other cars. They were far enough away that I couldn't see inside them clearly. I tried the handle lightly. Locked. She noticed. She smiled faintly and said, "Relax." My heart started beating faster. I asked her to unlock them. She didn't. Instead, she asked again if I trusted her. The way she repeated it felt heavier. I said I just prefer options. She nodded slowly. Then she said options are overrated. That sentence hit weird. She reached over and adjusted something on the dashboard. The interior lights dimmed slightly. I asked what she was doing. She said creating atmosphere. My stomach tightened. The radio volume lowered until it was almost silent. The only sound was the faint wind outside and my own breathing. She leaned back in her seat and said people reveal themselves when they feel confined. Confined. I said, I don't feel confined. She looked at me carefully. Then she said, your shoulders are tense. I hadn't realized they were. She asked when I would do if she decided not to unlock the doors. My mouth went dry. I laughed awkwardly and said I'd assume it was a joke. She didn't laugh. She asked seriously. I said I'd probably ask again. She nodded like she was taking notes. Then she said what if asking didn't work. The air inside the car felt heavier. I reached for my phone in my pocket. She noticed instantly. She asked who I'd call. I said maybe no one, just checking the time. She watched my hand closely. Then she said you can't get signal up here sometimes. My pulse jumped. I checked. 1 bar. I asked how often she comes here. She said enough to know the dead zones. Dead zones. That phrase sat heavy. She shifted in her seat and said some people need to feel a loss of control to understand it. Understand what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her hands on the steering wheel even though the engine was off. She said she likes testing trust early. Testing how? She looked at me and said by removing exits. My heart was pounding now. I tried the handle again. Still locked. I said this isn't funny. She tilted her head slightly and said I'm not laughing. The silence in the car stretched out. I could hear my own breathing. She asked if I thought she would hurt me. I didn't know how to answer that without escalating things. I said I don't know you well enough to say. She nodded slowly. Then she said that's honest. For a second, I thought she might unlock the doors. She didn't. Instead, she reached into the center console and pulled out something small. My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios. It was just a key fob. She held it loosely in her hand. She said everything is controlled from here, and pressed a button. The locks clicked again. Still locked. She said, see. I felt trapped in a way that's hard to describe. Not physically restrained, but psychologically boxed in. I thought about forcing the door, about raising my voice. But the overlook was quiet, distant. She watched me think. Then she asked what my first instinct was when the locks clicked. I said to get out. She nodded. She said that's survival. I didn't like where this was going. She leaned back and stared out at the water for a moment. Then she said, now imagine not being able to leave a situation whenever you want. My chest tightened. I asked what she meant. She said relationships, jobs, expectations. Most people panic when exit's close. I said this isn't a metaphor. She smiled slightly. Then, finally, she pressed the unlock button. Click. The doors unlocked. She didn't say anything else. Just looked at me. I didn't wait. I opened the door immediately and stepped out into the cold night air. My legs felt shaky but steady enough. I walked toward the edge of the lot and pretended to look at the view. After a few seconds, she got out too. She leaned against her car casually. Then she said you passed. I didn't ask what that meant. I told her I needed to head home. She didn't argue. We drove back down in silence. When we reached my car, she unlocked her doors without hesitation. I got out and didn't look back. Later that night, she sent one message. Trust is built through discomfort. I blocked her. I knew the night was going to turn weird when he started talking about patterns in the stars. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. We were barely halfway through dinner when he looked up at the sky, then back at me, and said he doesn't believe in coincidences. He said it like it was a fact everyone else was slow to accept. We met at an outdoor rooftop cinema. Not a normal movie theater, but one of those pop-up ones with beanbags and blankets spread across a flat building downtown. They were showing an old romance movie. The skyline was behind the screen, and the city lights flickered below us. I picked the location because it felt public and safe. Lots of couples around. Groups of friends. People laughing and taking pictures. He arrived right on time, carrying 2 bottled sodas he bought downstairs. $5 each. He handed one to me without asking what I liked. He looked normal. Average height, dark hair, soft voice. Nothing about him screamed intense. We found 2 seats near the back corner of the rooftop. Not isolated, but not right in the middle either. The movie started. We made small talk quietly at first, about how cheesy some of the dialogue was, about how weird it is watching romance movies on a first date. About 20 minutes in, he leaned closer and said he doesn't believe in coincidences. I thought he meant the movie plot. I asked what he meant. He said us. My stomach tightened slightly. I laughed awkwardly and said, what about us? He started listing things. How we both grew up in towns less than 30 miles apart. How we both moved to the city within the same year. How we both joined the same dating app within the same week. I said that's just probability. He shook his head slightly. He said probability is just another word for design people don't understand. That sentence stuck with me. He started explaining how the algorithm likely pushed us together intentionally. How certain interests overlap in ways that aren't random. How our schedules align too perfectly. He said he noticed that we both go to the same grocery store chain on Saturday mornings based on posts we'd shared months apart. I felt a small knot form in my stomach. I asked how he would know what day I go grocery shopping. He said from timestamps on old photos. He said it casually, like it was normal to analyze someone's posting patterns. The movie kept playing in the background, but I wasn't watching it anymore. He leaned back and looked up at the night sky. Then he said when 2 people's paths intersect this many times, it's not coincidence. It's convergence. Convergence. That word felt heavy. I said maybe it's just similar routines. He smiled slightly and said routines create destiny. I didn't like how confident he sounded. About halfway through the movie, he shifted the conversation. He said he actually noticed me before we matched. My heart skipped. I asked where. He said at the train station downtown. I use that station almost every weekday. He described the blue jacket I wear sometimes, the way I stand near the 3rd pillar on the platform. My chest tightened. I asked when that was. He said about 2 months ago. 2 months before we even matched online. I asked why he didn't say anything then. He said it wasn't time yet. That phrase made my skin feel cold. He explained that he believes timing matters more than chance, that he prefers observing before acting. Observing. I glanced around the rooftop. People were laughing at a funny scene in the movie. Everything looked normal, but my thoughts weren't. He told me he saw me at a coffee shop near my office once too. Said I always ordered the same drink. Said I sit near the window facing the street. I do. I asked how many times he'd seen me before we matched. He paused for a second, then said enough to know this wasn't random. I felt trapped in a way that didn't make sense because we were in a completely open space. He leaned closer and lowered his voice slightly. He said he adjusted his dating app radius after recognizing me. My heart started pounding. He said he narrowed it down until my profile appeared. That's not fate. That's targeting. I asked if he engineered it. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said inevitable outcomes sometimes require guidance. Guidance. Like he was steering something. I suddenly started replaying our early messages in my head. How we seemed to know exactly what to say. How our conversations felt almost too aligned. He said people mistake coincidence for chaos, but when you trace the lines backward, you see the design. I asked what design. He looked directly at me and said ours. I felt a wave of unease so strong it almost made me stand up right there. The movie reached a romantic scene where the main characters kiss in the rain. People around us sighed softly. He didn't react to the movie at all. He just kept looking at me. He said he doesn't chase random connections. He studies them. Studies. That word again. I asked if he studies everyone. He said no, only the ones who matter. I didn't know what to say to that. He started listing more overlaps. Mutual friends of friends. Similar playlists. The fact that we both visited the same art exhibit within days of each other last year. I remember posting one photo from that exhibit. He said he was there the day after. I felt like my entire timeline was being mapped out in front of me. He said when paths cross repeatedly, you don't ignore it, you lean into it. I asked what happens if one path doesn't want to lean. He looked at me for a long second. Then he said resistance is just fear of the inevitable. That sentence made my chest feel tight. I asked if he believes in free will. He said within limits. Limits defined by what? He said trajectory. I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. The sounds felt distant. He leaned back and said he knew tonight would happen the first time he saw me on the train platform. I asked how. He said because certain patterns demand completion. Completion. Like I was part of the sequence. I checked my phone subtly. No new messages. No distractions. Just me and his conversation. I told him I don't believe in destiny like that. He nodded slowly. Then he said belief isn't required for inevitability. I felt like the rooftop was getting smaller even though nothing physically changed. He asked if I felt it too. Felt what? He said the pull. I said no. He didn't look disappointed. He looked patient. Like he expected that answer. He said you will. The movie ended shortly after. People started clapping lightly and packing up their blankets. I stood up quickly and said I had an early morning. He stood too. He didn't argue. As we walked toward the stairs, he said he's glad the convergence finally happened. I didn't respond. When we reached the street level, he stopped and looked at me. He said now that we've aligned, things will accelerate. Accelerate how? He didn't explain. He just smiled softly. I went home and immediately locked all my social media accounts. The next morning, I saw a follow request from a private account. The bio said paths always meet again. I didn't catch it the first time she said it. There was too much noise around us, too many people talking and glasses clinking and music playing from the corner stage. I just thought she was muttering lyrics or talking to herself about something random. But then she checked her watch again and said it more clearly. It's going smoother this time. And something in my chest tightened immediately. We met at this indoor climbing gym that turns into a lounge at night. During the day, it's all chalk dust and harnesses, but after 7 p.m., they dim the lights, open a small bar, and play low music. People climb for a bit, then hang out on couches near the wall. She suggested it because she said, physical activity makes conversations more honest. I thought that sounded kind of cool. We matched on a dating app about 5 days before. She seemed adventurous. Lots of photos outdoors. Hiking, kayaking, random travel shots. She had this intense energy even through text, but not in a bad way. Just driven. When I got there, she was already halfway up one of the walls. Moving confidently, like she'd done this 1,000 times. I watched her finish the climb, drop down lightly, and smile at me. She looked exactly like her photos. Athletic build, hair tied back tight, smartwatch on her wrist. We rented harnesses. It was $22 each for the session. She paid for herself without hesitation. We climbed for about 30 minutes. She moved fast, barely paused to think about handholds. I struggled a bit more, which she found funny in a teasing way. Afterward, we grabbed drinks at the small bar inside. Mine was $7. Hers was $8. We sat on a couch near the climbing walls, watching other people attempt harder routes. At first, everything felt normal. We talked about travel, about the best hikes near the city, about work. She's in project management, which made sense with how organized she seemed. About 10 minutes into sitting down, she checked her watch. Not like someone casually glancing at the time. More like someone monitoring something. She muttered something under her breath. I didn't catch it. A few minutes later, she checked again. This time I heard it. It's going smoother this time. I asked what she meant. She looked up quickly, like she forgot I was there for a second. Then she smiled and said nothing, just thinking out loud. I tried to let it go. We kept talking. But every few minutes, her eyes flicked down to her watch. Not checking notifications, not reading messages, just glancing at the time. And occasionally muttering the same phrase. Smoother this time. My brain started filling in blanks I didn't want to fill. This time compared to what? I asked if she had another day after this. She laughed lightly and said no. Then she said she doesn't double book. That would complicate variables. Variables. That word stuck with me. I asked what variables. She said human ones. I didn't know how to respond to that. A group of people nearby cheered when someone reached the top of a difficult climb. The noise made me jump slightly. She noticed. She looked at her watch again. Then she nodded subtly. I asked again what she meant earlier. She leaned back and said she likes to refine things. Refine what? She said approaches. Approaches to what? She hesitated. Then said first impressions. My stomach felt uneasy. She explained that she treats first dates like field tests. Field tests. She said every interaction teaches her something. What works? What doesn't? What makes someone relax faster? Relax faster. I suddenly became very aware of my posture. She checked her watch again. Then she said usually by this point there's resistance. Resistance to what? She looked at me directly. Then said to control. My chest tightened. I said I don't feel controlled. She smiled slightly. Then she said that's good. The way she said it felt if a checkpoint had been cleared. I asked if she's done this before. She nodded calmly. Said everyone does it differently. Most people just don't admit it. I said admit what? She said that first dates are experiments. I tried to keep it light and joked that I didn't sign a consent form. She didn't laugh. Instead, she leaned forward and said it's important to understand reactions under subtle pressure. Pressure. I hadn't felt pressure until that moment. Now I did. She checked her watch again. Then she said the first one ended at this exact minute mark. My pulse spiked. I asked what first one. She hesitated. Then said a date last month. I asked what happened. She shrugged slightly. Said he panicked early. Panicked about what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked if I feel comfortable. I said mostly. She nodded like she was writing that down somewhere invisible. She said timing is everything. I asked timing for what? She said for escalation. That word hit hard. I felt like I was sitting in the middle of a controlled environment and didn't know the rules. She checked her watch again. Then said usually by now the discomfort sets in. My throat felt dry. I asked what discomfort. She tilted her head slightly and said awareness. I said awareness of what? She didn't respond. Instead, she asked if I noticed that we were now one of the only people still sitting in this section. I glanced around. She was right. Most of the climbers had left or moved to another area. The lighting seemed in her now. The music quieter. She said the last one didn't notice the shift. Shift. She was narrating this like it was a replay. I asked how many times she's done this. She paused. Then said enough to improve. Improve what? She looked at her watch one more time. Then smiled slightly. She said you made it past the point where the others stood up. My heart was pounding. I said stood up to leave. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked if I trust her. That question again. I said trust takes time. She nodded like she expected that. Then she said this is the part where I usually suggest we go somewhere quieter. My stomach dropped. I said I'm good here. She watched me carefully. Then she checked her watch again and muttered it. It's going smoother this time. I stood up. I said I actually need to head out. She didn't try to stop me. She just nodded calmly, like this was another data point. As I walked toward the exit, I felt her eyes on me. When I reached the door, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Next time, I'll adjust the timing. There wasn't a next time. I didn't realize how quiet the park had gotten until he asked the question. We were sitting on a bench near the edge of a lake, and the sun had already dropped behind the trees. The path lights hadn't turned on yet, so everything was in that weird gray in between where shapes blur together. The air felt thicker somehow, still. That's when he asked if anyone would notice if I didn't come home tonight. And the worst part wasn't the question. It was the look on his face when I said yes. We met through a mutual hobby group online. Photography. He commented on one of my sunset photos, and we started messaging about camera settings and editing apps. He seemed normal, thoughtful, not overly flirty. He suggested we meet at the lakeside park because he said it has the best golden hour light. I agreed because it was public and early evening. Safe. When I got there, he was already standing near the water with his camera hanging from his neck. He looked like his photos. Slim, glasses, calm posture. He smiled when he saw me and gave a small wave. We walked along the path talking about lenses and lighting and how annoying it is when people over-edit their pictures. He seemed passionate about photography in a real way, not fake deep. We took a few photos of the sunset. He even showed me some tricks on adjusting exposure. Nothing weird. After the sun went down, most of the other people started leaving. Joggers finished their laps. Couples packed up their picnic blankets. We ended up sitting on a wooden bench facing the lake. That's when the conversation shifted. He started asking about my routine, what time I usually get home from work, whether I live alone, how often I go out at night. I answered casually at first, said I have a roommate, said my sister checks in on me sometimes. Normal stuff. He nodded slowly like he was connecting dots. Then he asked it. If anyone would notice if I didn't come home tonight. It wasn't said in a joking tone. It wasn't flirty. It was measured, like he genuinely wanted to know. My brain froze for a second. I forced a small laugh and said of course someone would notice. He tilted his head slightly. Then he asked who. I said my roommate would, and my sister would probably call if I didn't respond by morning. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just a small drop in his eyebrows. A flicker of something that looked like disappointment. He looked back at the lake and said that complicates things. My stomach tightened immediately. I asked what things. He shrugged lightly and said nothing important. But the air between us had shifted. I started noticing how empty the path behind us was. How the parking lot was farther than I remembered. How the trees blocked the view from the road. He asked if I share my location with anyone. I said sometimes yes. He nodded slowly. Then he asked if I had tonight. I didn't answer right away. I hadn't. I usually send my location on first dates, but since it was a public park and early evening, I skipped it. He noticed my hesitation. He smiled faintly and said, "You didn't, did you?" My chest felt tight. I said it doesn't matter because people know where I am generally. He shook his head slightly and said general isn't specific. Specific. That word felt heavy. I reached for my phone in my pocket and unlocked it casually. 1 bar of signal. He watched me. Then he said the reception here drops after dark. My heart started pounding. I checked. It flickered down to no service. I looked up at him. He was still calm. Too calm. He said he comes here often to shoot night reflections. I asked why that matters. He said because he knows the blind spots. Blind spots. That word made my stomach twist. I stood up from the bench slowly. Said maybe we should head back toward the entrance. He didn't stand right away. He just looked at me. Then he said if someone didn't have people checking on them, life would be simpler. Simpler for who? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked if I trust him. That question again. I said trust takes time. He nodded like he'd heard that before. Then he stood up. For a second, I thought he might block the path. He didn't. He just walked beside me as we headed toward the parking lot. The gravel under our shoes sounded too loud in the quiet. He started talking again like nothing happened. About long exposure photography. About how still water makes the best reflections. I wasn't listening. I was focused on the distance to my car. Halfway down the path, he said it's interesting how social ties change outcomes. I didn't respond. He said if he'd said no, it would have been easier. My heart jumped into my throat. I asked easier for what? He stopped walking. I took 2 more steps before realizing he wasn't beside me anymore. I turned around. He was standing there in the dim light, hands in his jacket pockets. He said easier to keep you. Keep. That word hit like ice water. I forced a laugh and said that's not funny. He didn't laugh. He just said people disappear more often than others realize. My pulse was racing so fast I felt lightheaded. I said my sister expects me home by 10. He glanced at his watch. It was 9:42. He said that doesn't leave much time. Much time for what? He stepped forward slowly. I stepped back instinctively. I reached into my pocket and dialed my sister without looking at the screen. No signal. He noticed the movement. He said, like I said, reception drops. I felt trapped in a way that made my vision blur at the edges. Then suddenly, headlights swept across the path. A car turning into the parking lot. The beam of light cut through the trees and landed on us for a split second. He stiffened. I didn't wait. I turned and started walking faster toward the lot. He followed but didn't grab me. The closer we got to the cars, the stronger my signal bars returned. 2 bars. 3. My phone buzzed in my hand. Missed call from my roommate. I answered immediately and said loudly that I was almost at my car. I made sure he heard it. When I reached my car, I unlocked it quickly and got inside. I locked the doors immediately. He stood a few feet away watching. Then he gave a small nod, like he was accepting the outcome. I drove off without looking back. Later that night, he sent one message. Next time, choose isolation carefully. There wasn't a next time. I should have lied. Not about my job. Not about where I live. Not about anything normal. I should have lied about my biggest fear. Because the second she pulled out a small notebook and actually wrote it down, neat and careful like she was recording an order at a cafe, something in my gut told me this wasn't just small talk. We met at a board game cafe downtown, the kind with shelves stacked to the ceiling with colorful boxes and long wooden tables where strangers sit together and roll dice. It smelled like coffee and cardboard. Loud, but not chaotic. She picked it. Said games reveal how people handle stress and strategy. I thought that sounded interesting. We'd been messaging for about a week. She came off smart. Intense, but in a witty way. She asked thoughtful questions over text. About values, about goals, about what motivates people. Nothing too weird. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table near the back, flipping through a game manual. She looked exactly like her pictures. Dark hair, sharp eyes, small silver ring on her finger. She smiled when she saw me, but it didn't fully reach her eyes. We ordered drinks. Mine was $6. Hers was $7. She paid separately and said she likes clean transactions. That phrase stuck with me. We picked a simple strategy game and started playing. At first it was normal. She was competitive, but not mean about it. She paid attention to every move I made. About halfway through the game, she started asking deeper questions. What motivates you? What do you regret? What do you avoid? I answered casually, nothing too revealing. Then she asked what my biggest fear was. I laughed and said like spiders or something. She didn't smile. She said no real fear. I hesitated. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, completely focused on me. I said probably being trapped, like physically stuck somewhere without a way out. I don't even know why I said that. It just came out. She nodded slowly. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small black notebook. My stomach tightened immediately. I asked what she was doing. She said documenting. Then she wrote something down. Slowly, carefully. I watched her pen move across the page. I asked what she wrote. She didn't show me. She just said it helps her decide. Decide what? She looked up at me and said compatibility. That answer didn't match the energy of what just happened. I tried to laugh it off and said that's intense for a first date. She shrugged slightly and said first dates are the most honest. She asked follow-up questions. What kind of trapped? Confined space or emotional? Would I panic immediately or try to stay calm? I felt I was filling out a psychological profile. I answered lightly at first, said I'd probably try to stay calm but would hate not having options. She nodded again and made another small note. I asked what she's deciding exactly. She said she believes in efficiency. That word again. Efficiency. She explained that people's fears tell you how to approach them. Approach how? She didn't clarify. Instead, she closed the notebook gently and slid it back into her bag. The rest of the game felt different. She watched me more than the board. Every time I hesitated on a move, she studied my face. I started noticing small details. How she kept her bag within reach at all times. How she positioned her chair slightly angled toward the exit. After the game, she suggested we take a walk outside, so the cafe gets stuffy. It was around 9:30, still some foot traffic outside, but not as crowded. We walked down a side street lined with closed shops. The lights from the main road faded behind us. I asked what she wrote in the notebook. She said she categorizes fears. Categorizes. Like files. I asked how many categories there are. She said enough. The way she said it made me uneasy. She asked if I'd ever been stuck somewhere before. I said once, in an elevator when I was a kid, only for a few minutes. She listened carefully, then said that makes sense. Makes sense how? She didn't answer. We reached a narrow alley between two buildings, not dark, but quieter. She stopped walking. I almost walked past her. She looked at me and said, "Do you still feel like you have options right now?" My chest tightened. I glanced around. There was a way back to the main road. I said, "Yeah." She nodded slowly. Then she asked if I'd panic if the path behind us was blocked. My heart started pounding. I said probably. She reached into her bag again. My mind jumped to worst-case scenarios. She pulled out the notebook. Flipped to the page she wrote on earlier. I caught a glimpse of my name at the top. Under it, a single word. Trapped. My stomach dropped. She said some fears are manageable. Some are useful. Useful for what? She looked at me directly, then said for leverage. That word hit hard. I said this isn't funny. She said I'm not joking. I took a step back. She stepped forward. Not aggressively. Just measured. She said if someone fears being trapped, you don't corner them immediately. You ease them in. My pulse was racing so fast I felt dizzy. I said ease into what? She tilted her head slightly, then said situations. I felt like I was part of an experiment. I asked how many people are in that notebook. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said you're reacting faster than the last one. The last one. My throat felt tight. I said last what? She didn't clarify. Instead, she closed the notebook and slid it back into her bag. Then she stepped aside slightly, clearing the path behind her. She said you can go. I didn't wait. I walked quickly back toward the main road. I didn't run, but I wanted to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. One message. Next time, she was a smaller fear. I blocked it immediately. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I searched her name online. Found a blog. Anonymous. Entries about first impressions. About categorizing fears. About using them. I didn't read all of it. I didn't need to. I knew something was off the second he told me I missed a turn. Not suggested. Not asked if I meant to go that way. He corrected me. Like he walked this road 100 times before. And that's the part that still makes my stomach drop, because I had never shown him exactly where I live. We met at a small dessert cafe near campus. Nothing fancy, just a cozy place with warm lighting and shelves of pastries behind glass. I picked it because it was 5 blocks from my apartment and always crowded at night. He seemed normal online. We matched on an app about a week earlier. He was polite, funny in a dry way, and not pushy. He asked about my classes, my major, what I wanted to do after graduation. Nothing weird in text. When I got to the cafe, he was already there, sitting at a corner table. He stood up when he saw me and smiled. He looked exactly like his photos. Tall, clean haircut. Neat jacket. We ordered cheesecake slices. Mine was $8. His was $9. He paid before I could even take my card out. We sat and talked for about an hour. Honestly, the first part of the date was completely fine. He was attentive, asked thoughtful questions, laughed at my jokes. He even told a funny story about getting lost in another city once. Ironic. Around 9:30, the cafe started closing. Chairs scraping against the floor, staff wiping down counters. I said I should head home because I had an early morning. He immediately said he'd walk me. I told him it wasn't necessary. I live close. He insisted, said it's safer at night. I hesitated for half a second, but it was only 5 blocks. Busy streets. I told myself it would be fine. We stepped outside into the cool air. The main road was still lively. Cars passing, people walking in small groups. We started heading toward my apartment. But instead of taking the most direct route, I turned down a slightly longer street. Still well lit, still safe. Just not the straight shot. I did it without thinking. I don't usually take the same path home every time. 2 steps into the turn, he stopped slightly behind me. Then he said you usually go straight and cut through the side street by the pharmacy. My heart skipped. I slowed down. Asked what he meant. He said that route is faster. I forced a small laugh and said I like mixing it up. He didn't laugh. He said it's less efficient. Efficient. That word again. I asked how he knew which route I usually take. He shrugged lightly and said he pays attention. To what? He said patterns. My chest tightened. I've posted pictures from the cafe before. Sometimes you can see a bit of the street in the background. Maybe he pieced it together. I tried to tell myself that. But the confidence in his voice didn't sound like guessing. We kept walking. I stuck to the longer street. He walked half a step behind me. Then he said the alley by the pharmacy is actually well lit at this time. I stopped. Turned toward him. Asked how he would know that. He looked at me like I was asking something obvious. He said he's been around the area. Around how? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked why I changed the route tonight. I said I didn't. He tilted his head slightly and said he did. My pulse was starting to race. We were still on a busy street, but it felt narrower somehow. I said I don't always take the same way home. He nodded slowly. Then he said you did the last 3 Thursdays. My stomach dropped. I asked how he would know that. He didn't smile. He just said you leave the cafe around 9:20 on Thursdays. My chest felt tight. I said you've only been here once. He looked at me for a long second. Then said tonight, yes. That sentence made my skin feel cold. I tried to keep walking, keeping my pace steady. We reached the intersection where I could either turn toward the pharmacy alley or continue straight toward a busier road. I chose the busier road. He slowed again. Then he corrected me. Said that's not the quickest way. Not asked. Corrected. I said I'm not in a rush. He said I thought you said you had an early morning. That felt like a trap. I didn't respond. The street started getting quieter as we moved farther from the main strip. I suddenly realized that by trying to avoid the route he expected, I might have led us somewhere worse. He asked if I was nervous. I said no. He said your shoulders are tight. My breathing felt shallow. I said I just prefer variety. He nodded slowly. Then he said unpredictability complicates planning. Planning. That word hit hard. I asked planning for what? He looked ahead toward the end of the block. Then said for timing. My heart was pounding now. I could see my building 2 blocks away. Lights out in a few windows. Safety. I quickened my pace slightly. He matched it easily. Then he said the pharmacy alley is actually safer because there are fewer blind spots. Blind spots. That word again. I asked why you would know about blind spots. He hesitated. Then said he likes mapping neighborhoods. Mapping. I reached into my pocket and pretended to check my phone. 3 missed texts from my roommate. She usually checks in when I'm out. I texted her quickly that I was 2 minutes away. He noticed me typing. Asked if I was updating someone. I said yes. He nodded slowly. Then said that changes things. That phrase made my stomach twist. We reached the corner of my block. I slowed down. He looked at the building numbers. Then said you're on the 3rd floor, right side. My vision blurred slightly. I never told him which floor. I asked how he knew that. He said your window has a plant on the sill. My chest tightened painfully. I do have a plant on the sill. You can see it from the street if you look up. I asked how many times he'd been on this block. He didn't answer. Instead, he said I like making sure people get home safely. Safely. I stopped in front of my building, turned toward him, said thank you for walking me. He nodded, then said next time, stick to your usual route. Next time. I forced a small smile and said goodnight. I unlocked the building door quickly and stepped inside. As it closed behind me, I glanced through the glass. He was still standing there, not moving, just looking up at my window. Later that night, my phone buzzed. One message. Consistency makes everything easier. I didn't respond. The next day, I took a completely different route to class. And every time I pass the pharmacy alley now, I feel like someone is already standing there, waiting for me to turn. I've replayed that exact sentence in my head more times than I can count. Not because it was loud, not because it caused a scene, but because of how calm she sounded when she said it. She leaned closer across the table, barely moving her lips, and told me that if I stood up right now, she would scream. And the worst part is I believed her immediately. We met at this 24-hour diner just off the highway. Not the cute retro kind. More like the slightly run-down one with cracked vinyl boots and a flickering sign outside. She picked it because she said she liked places that were always open. Less pressure to rush. We matched online 3 days before. She was funny in text. Kind of sarcastic but smart. She asked a lot of questions about my hobbies and work, but nothing too weird. I figured a late-night diner was safe. Bright lights, other people around. When I walked in, she was already sitting in a booth near the middle of the room. Not near the exit. Not near the bathrooms. Just right in the center. She looked like her pictures. Long dark hair, simple black jacket, sharp eyes. She smiled when she saw me and waved me over. I slid into the booth across from her. We ordered milkshakes. Mine was $6. Hers was $6. She insisted on paying for her own, which felt normal. The first 30 minutes were completely fine. We talked about school, about work, about random movies we both liked. She seemed engaged. She laughed at my jokes. Nothing about it screamed danger. But then she started asking strange questions. She asked how I handle confrontation. I said it depends on the situation. She asked if I ever panic in public. I said not really. She nodded slowly like she was evaluating that. She asked if I've ever been falsely accused of anything. That one caught me off guard. I said no. She stared at me for a few seconds longer than normal. Then she smiled faintly and said good. I started feeling this low hum of discomfort in my chest. About an hour in, I realized I wasn't really feeling it. Not danger, just no connection. She was intense in a way that felt draining. I decided I would finish my drink and politely leave. I shifted slightly in my seat. That's when she leaned forward. Not aggressively, just close enough that her voice didn't need to be loud. And she said, if you stand up right now, I'll scream. My brain didn't process it at first. I blinked at her. She kept her expression neutral. I asked what she meant. She didn't repeat it loudly. She just said it again quietly. If you stand up, I will scream and say you touched me. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. The diner was still busy. A couple at the counter. 2 truck drivers in the corner. A waitress walking past with a coffee pot. All of them would hear her. I felt trapped in the most public place possible. I said it's not funny. She tilted her head slightly. Then she said I'm not joking. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I asked why she would say that. She leaned back slightly, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. She said she hates when people waste her time. That phrase again. I said I wasn't planning to. She glanced down at my half-finished milkshake, then back at me. She said I could tell you were about to leave. My mouth felt dry. I said it's a first date. People leave all the time. She nodded. Then she said yes, but I prefer control over how it ends. Control. She folded her hands calmly on the table. Then she said, I've tested this before. Tested what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said you look like someone who cares about his reputation. My chest tightened. She was right. If she screamed and accused me, even if it wasn't true, it would cause chaos. People would believe her first. I felt my hands start to shake slightly under the table. She watched me carefully. Then she said, "Don't worry. I only scream if they try to leave early." My brain was scrambling for options. I glanced toward the waitress. She was pouring coffee at the counter, back turned. I thought about standing up anyway, calling her bluff. But the certainty in her voice scared me. She said we're going to finish the conversation properly. I said, "What does properly mean?" She said, "You will stay until I decide it's over." The air felt heavy. I nodded slowly, trying to buy time. She relaxed slightly like she just won something. For the next 20 minutes, she talked about how men ghost too often, about how she refuses to be discarded, about how she learned that public perception is powerful. I barely heard half of it. I was calculating, thinking about how to exit without triggering her. I'd noticed something. She kept her purse on the seat beside her, not in her lap, not on the floor, just placed carefully within reach. I wondered if she had her phone ready to record, or something else. She asked if I understood her point. I said yes. She smiled faintly. Then she said good. Because last time he didn't. Last time. My pulse spiked. I asked what happened last time. She shrugged slightly. Said he tried to leave. I didn't ask what she did. I didn't need to. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 15 minutes, she checked the time on her phone. Then she looked at me and said, "Okay. Just okay." I didn't move yet. I waited. She nodded once and said, "You can go now." My legs felt stiff as I stood up slowly. She didn't scream. She just watched me. I walked toward the counter and paid for my milkshake even though she already paid hers. $12 total. I didn't look back until I reached the door. She was still sitting there, smiling slightly, like she'd proven something. When I got home, I blocked her on everything. 2 days later, I got a notification from an unknown account. It was a photo of me sitting in that diner booth. Caption, "Behave this time." I didn't even realize my name was being typed until I saw the blinking cursor next to it. That's the part that gets me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted across the table. It was just a small white screen in his hand, the glow reflecting on his face while he calmly added me to a list like he was updating groceries. We met at this late-night bowling alley that also had a bar inside. Not the loud teenager kind, but the older one near the industrial side of town. Dim lights, classic rock playing softly, only a few lanes in use. He suggested it because he said bowling reveals personality without being too serious. I thought that sounded harmless. We matched on a dating app about 4 days before. He seemed analytical but funny. He made little jokes about statistics and odds, said he likes tracking trends in his life. I figured that meant fitness goals or work stuff. When I got there, he was already renting shoes. He waved when he saw me and handed me my pair like he'd been waiting. We paid for 1 lane for an hour, $28 total. He insisted on covering it. The first game was normal. We teased each other about gutter balls. He clapped politely when I got a strike. He seemed relaxed. We ordered drinks. Mine was $9. His was $10. He paid again and joked that he'd add it to the data later. I laughed at that. Big mistake. After the second game, we sat at a small round table near our lane. The place was quiet enough that you could hear pins crashing from other lanes, but not much else. He asked about my past relationships. Nothing too deep at first, just how long they lasted, why they ended. I answered casually, said one ended because we grew apart, another because of distance. He nodded like he was filing that away. Then he pulled out his phone. I thought he was checking the time. Instead, he turned the screen slightly toward himself and started scrolling. I glanced over by accident. At the top of the note in bold letters, it said first date outcomes. My stomach tightened. Under it was a list of names. each name followed by a short phrase. Left early. No chemistry. Second date declined. Too emotional. Moved too fast. My chest felt cold. I stared at the screen a second too long. He noticed. Then he smiled faintly and tilted the phone just enough so I could see clearly. He said he likes clarity. Clarity about what? He said about patterns in behavior. He scrolled slowly through the list. I counted at least 12 names. Some had check marks next to them. Some had small notes. One had blocked. My heart was pounding now. I asked if that was a joke. He shook his head slightly. Said it's documentation. That word again. Documentation. He said dating is trial and error. I said that doesn't mean you have to log it like a project. He shrugged. Said everything is a project if you zoom out enough. Then he tapped at the bottom of the list. The cursor blinked. He typed my name. Slowly. Letter by letter. I felt exposed in a way that made my hands cold. I asked what outcome he was planning to assign me. He said that depends on you. My pulse spiked. I asked depends on what? He leaned back and said on how the night concludes. Concludes how? He said whether you attempt to exit prematurely. The way he said exit made my stomach twist. I said it's a first date. People can leave whenever they want. He nodded. Then said yes, but the outcome reflects that choice. I didn't like the way he framed it. He scrolled up slightly and showed me one entry. Name followed by created scene. My chest tightened. I asked what that meant. He said she reacted poorly to being evaluated. Evaluated. That word hit hard. I asked if that's what this is. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said I prefer transparency. Then he added a dash after my name. Left it blank. Like a placeholder. My heart was racing. I said you're not seriously categorizing people like that. He looked at me calmly and said everyone categorizes. I just write it down. I suddenly became very aware of how isolated our lane felt. The other bowlers were a few lanes away. The bar area was behind a low divider. I asked what happens after the outcome is written. He said sometimes nothing. Sometimes follow up. Follow up how? He didn't explain. Instead, he asked if I wanted to bowl another game. I said no, I think I'm good. He nodded slowly. Then he looked down at his phone. His thumb hovered near my name. I felt like my reaction was being weighed. I stood up slowly. He didn't stop me. He just watched. I said I have an early morning. He said that aligns with your previous statements. Previous statements. Like he'd been cross-referencing everything I said. I grabbed my bag. My hands were shaking slightly. As I stepped away from the table, he said, "Wait." My heart jumped. I turned slightly. He looked at his phone, then at me, and typed something next to my name. Didn't show me. Just typed. I asked what he wrote. He smiled faintly and said predictable. My chest tightened painfully. I walked toward the front desk without looking back. Paid for nothing because he already covered the lane. As I pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot, I felt his eyes on me. Later that night, curiosity got the better of me. I checked my social media. A new follow request. Private account. Profile picture blank. Bio read data and it doesn't lie. I declined it immediately. The next morning, I got a message from an unknown number. It was a screenshot. My name. On the list. Followed by attempted early exit. I knew I should have left when she locked her phone and slid it face down between us like it was a piece in a game. But I didn't. And that's what she meant when she thanked me for being cooperative. We met at a late-night art exhibit in an old warehouse near the river. It was one of those temporary pop-ups with weird installations and dim lighting. Concrete floors, exposed pipes, random sculptures made of metal and glass. The kind of place where everyone whispers even though no one told them to. She suggested it because she said she likes dates where there's something to analyze. We matched online about a week earlier. She seemed thoughtful, intense but intelligent. She asked deep questions right away. What do you value most? What makes you uncomfortable? What do you avoid? I thought she was just introspective. When I got there, she was already walking slowly around a giant mirrored structure in the center of the room. She looked exactly like her pictures. Dark coat, calm expression, eyes that didn't blink much. We greeted each other briefly and started walking through the exhibit. At first, everything felt normal. We talked about the artwork, about how some pieces felt unsettling on purpose. She made smart observations about perception and control. Control. That word kept popping up in small ways. About 40 minutes in, we ended up in a quieter section of the warehouse. Less crowded, just a few people scattered around. There was an installation made of hanging chains that clinked softly when the air moved. We stood near it. That's when she thanked me for being cooperative. I asked what she meant. She smiled slightly and said most men panic by this point. My stomach tightened immediately. Panic about what? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "You haven't tried to leave yet." I blinked at her. I hadn't planned to leave, not yet. But the way she framed it made me suddenly aware that maybe I should. I asked why someone would panic. She looked at me carefully, then said because they start to realize they're being evaluated. Evaluated. That word hit hard. I asked, evaluated how? She tilted her head slightly and said through subtle pressure. I didn't understand. She stepped a little closer. Not touching, just close enough that I felt it. She said the environment matters. Dim lighting, limited exits, unfamiliar space. My chest tightened as I glanced around. The warehouse did feel darker than before. I hadn't noticed when the crowd thinned. She said some men get uncomfortable once they notice the variables. Variables. My heart was beating faster now. I said, "What variables?" She pointed subtly toward the entrance to that section. 2 security guards stood near it. Not close enough to hear us, but visible. She said the last one tried to raise his voice. My throat felt dry. I asked what happened. She shrugged slightly, said it didn't go well for him. The way she said it was so calm. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She nodded like that was the correct answer. Then she said good, because panic complicates things. Complicates what? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She held it but didn't open it. She said this part usually triggers them. My pulse spiked. I asked what part. She unfolded the paper slowly. It was a printed screenshot. My dating profile, but with notes scribbled around it. Small arrows pointing to my answers. Comments in the margins. Risk averse. Conflict avoidant. Predictable schedule. My stomach dropped. I asked where she got that. She said from you. Like that explained everything. She said most men don't realize how much they reveal before the first date even starts. I felt exposed. She thanked me again for staying calm. Said you're still here. My mind was racing. I thought about walking away, but the way she'd said panic makes things worse echoed in my head. I asked what happens if someone panics. She looked at the security guards again briefly, then back at me. She said narratives form quickly in public spaces. My chest felt tight. She didn't have to say it directly. I understood. If she raised her voice, if she accused, if she looked distressed, I'd be the one explaining. She stepped even closer, then said you're doing better than the others. The others. My heart was pounding so loud I felt lightheaded. I asked how many others. She didn't answer. Instead, she folded the paper and slid it back into her pocket. Then she said, "I'd like to see how long it takes before someone asks to leave." My breathing felt shallow. I said, "Are you testing me?" She smiled faintly, then said, "I'm observing you." Observing. I suddenly felt like every reaction was being cataloged. She said most men panic around the 45-minute mark in this section. I glanced at my phone. It had been about 48 minutes since we entered this part of the exhibit. She noticed. She said, "See." My pulse was racing. I asked what you want from me. She said nothing dramatic. Just data. Data. That word again. I realized something then. This wasn't about attraction. It was about control. About seeing how far someone would go to avoid conflict. She stepped back slightly. Gave me space. Then said you can leave whenever you want. But her tone suggested consequences. I took a slow breath. Looked toward the exit. Then back at her. I said I think I'm going to head out. Her expression didn't change. She nodded once. Then said thank you. For what? She said for confirming the pattern. My stomach twisted. I walked toward the exit slowly. The security guards glanced at me but didn't react. No scene. No accusations. Nothing. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Cooperative until 52 minutes. I blocked it immediately. Later that night, I realized something worse. She never actually needed to threaten anything. She just needed me to believe she could. I knew something was wrong before he even said it. Not during dinner. Not while we were walking back. It was this quiet pressure that built slowly, like when a room gets stuffy and you don't realize it until you try to breathe deeper. We met at a small jazz bar tucked between two taller buildings downtown. It wasn't loud or flashy, just soft yellow lights, a tiny stage, and round tables packed close together. He picked it and said he liked places where conversations feel private even when they're not. That should have meant something. We matched on a dating app about 5 days earlier. He seemed calm, thoughtful, a little mysterious, but not in an obvious red flag way. He asked normal questions. What I do for work. How long I've lived in the city. What kind of music I like. When I walked into the bar, he was already seated near the wall, facing the room. He stood when he saw me, smiled warmly, and pulled out my chair. Everything felt fine at first. We ordered drinks. Mine was $12. His was $14. He insisted on paying and joked that lit music requires support. We talked about the band playing that night, about the city, about random travel stories. He listened carefully, not interrupting, not checking his phone. But he kept making small observations. About how I sit with my bag close to me. About how I scan the room every few minutes. About how I position myself with a clear view of the exit. He said it lightly, like he was complimenting my awareness. I laughed it off. Around 10:30, I told him I should head home. Early warning. He nodded immediately and said he'd walk me. I told him it wasn't necessary. I live close. He insisted gently. Said it's not safe at night. We stepped out onto the sidewalk. The streets were still busy but thinning out. The walk to my apartment was about 10 minutes. We talked casually at first. About the music, about a funny story from his job. But then he started pointing things out. How quiet this block gets after 11. How the street light near the corner flickers. How there's a blind spot by the alley next to the bakery. My stomach tightened slightly. I asked how he knows that. He shrugged and said he likes to observe cities. Observe. That word again. As we turned onto my street, he slowed down slightly. I noticed he looked up at the building numbers before I even said anything. I asked if he'd been in this area before. He said maybe. Maybe. That answer felt too vague. We reached the entrance to my building. I pulled my keys out of my bag. That's when he smiled. Not wide, not exaggerated. Just this small, knowing smile. And he said, relax. Then he said this is usually where they realize it's too late. My brain stopped for a second. I asked what he meant. He stepped a little closer. Not touching. Just close enough that I felt it. He said this is the point where most of them understand the pattern. Pattern. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I asked what pattern. He looked up at my building, then back at me, and said the illusion of safety. My hands felt colder on my keys. I said I don't understand. He tilted his head slightly and said they always feel safe at the door. Because it's home. Because it's familiar. But doors only lock from the inside. My pulse spiked. I glanced around. The street was quieter now. One car passed slowly at the end of the block. He noticed me scanning, then said, "See. Most men think the danger is out there. Not here." I said, "I'm going inside." He nodded calmly, then said, "Go ahead." My hand shook slightly as I inserted the key. I unlocked the main door. It clicked open. I stepped inside the small entry hallway. He didn't follow. He stayed just outside. Then he said, "It's interesting how predictable people are." I asked what you're talking about. He said, "You invited me to walk you home." I said, "No, you insisted." He smiled slightly and said, "But you didn't refuse hard enough." My chest tightened painfully. I felt like every word was a trap. He said this is the part where they realize they gave away the route. The building. The timing. My stomach dropped. I said, "You don't know which apartment is mine." He looked up again, then said, "Third floor, left side." My vision blurred for a second. I asked how. He said the plant in the window. The light that's usually on. My pulse was racing so fast I felt dizzy. I said, "You've been here before." He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said most of them only connect the dots when it's too late. Too late for what? He leaned closer to the doorway, not stepping inside. Just close enough that his shadow crossed into the hall. Then he said for distance to matter. I felt trapped in my own building. I could run up the stairs. I could slam the door. But he was still calm. Not aggressive. Not threatening. Just confident. I said, "I'm going upstairs." He nodded. Then said, "Of course." I stepped back fully into the hallway. I closed the door. It clicked shut. I locked it immediately. My heart was pounding in my ears. I ran up the stairs 2 at a time. When I reached my apartment door, my hands were shaking. I unlocked it quickly and stepped inside. Locked it. Double locked it. I walked to the window. Slowly. Carefully. And looked down. He was still there. Standing on the sidewalk. Looking up. Not moving. Just watching. My phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number. One message. Doors only delay. I blocked it immediately. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I left early for work. When I stepped outside, the street looked normal. Quiet. Empty. But on the brick wall near the entrance to my building, someone had drawn a small chalk mark. A simple arrow, pointing up.